Dispiritedly, he turned to weave through the house and escape. It would be a long cold walk home, but somehow, the party had made that seem appealing. He was just passing the hall and glanced up the stairs when he saw a flash of red, and instinctively, he glanced up. Quietly, he walked up the first half-dozen steps until he could peer at the upstairs hall. Wearing the attractive red dress he had noted earlier, Astrid was being held tight in Dogsbreath's arms and was being inexorably dragged into one of the bedrooms. She was struggling desperately against the much more powerful opponent, kicking and clawing at him. And as he focused on her, he could hear her voice over the pounding beat of the music. "Get off me! Help!" Chapter 22, Unexpected Hero. Chapter text. He stared at the sight. Astrid's golden hair was coming out of the braid, her azure eyes shimmering with tears, and she was desperately struggling against the much bigger and more powerful teen who had her helpless in his grasp. Dogsbreath was clearly drunk, his eyes hazy and movements a little clumsy, but more than compensated for by his strength. Astrid didn't stand a chance. He sneaked up the stairs until he was fully on the landing, watching the struggle, and Astrid's eyes alighted on him. The azure depths were dark with desperation. "Help me," she pleaded, struggling. Dogsbreath blinked and looked at him, then his face fell into a scowl. "Get lost, Fishbone," he sneered, his voice slurred. "Home. Maybe a problem since I have an excellent sense of direction," Hiccup shot back, assessing his options. There didn't seem to be any especially promising, since he knew Dogsbreath could probably beat him to a pulp without breaking a sweat and probably still hang on to Astrid. "Well, take your sense of direction and frickin' get outta here." Dogsbreath sneered. "Me and Miss Perfect have got some fun planned." "Get off me!" Astrid shouted. "Please." Dogsbreath dragged her back into the bedroom and kicked the door closed, then dragged the girl towards the bed, tossing her down and pinning her to the bed. Staring up at the more powerful boy, she continued to struggle and tears spilled from her terrified eyes. "Please, get off me," she whispered as he began to slide her dress up. Hiccup stared at the closed door and heard the whispered plea. And while she had been cruel and dismissive to him and treated him unfairly even when he had helped her, she was a human being and she was afraid and powerless. He glanced at the door. Dogsbreath would make his life hell, so he might as well make it worth his while. Then he saw what he needed. "No." Astrid whimpered, and then the door slammed open and Dogsbreath looked up to meet a chair. He gave a loud grunt as Hiccup swung the chair again and knocked him off the pinned girl. Astrid was frozen, face streaked with tears and trembling. Her scarlet dress was slid up above her waist, displaying white lacy panties that Dogsbreath in his drunken clumsiness hadn't managed to remove, yet. Hiccup grabbed her wrist and hauled her to her feet. "Simon, I think I only stunned him," he said urgently. "He really does have rocks for a head." She was shaking, but he pulled her onto the landing and cast around for the bathroom. She paused, then darted towards the stairs. "No," he hissed. "Maggots and Savage are down there by the door. I'm sure they know he was up there with you. They'll hold you up until he can get you." She froze and stared at him with frightened eyes. "What?" she whispered. He looked embarrassed. "They're not very nice people," he admitted. "Sorry. Now come on, unless you want to wait for him to get up and come for you again." She snatched her purse, which she had dropped in the struggle, and followed him into the bathroom. He slammed the bolt home and winced, staring around. "Are you okay?" "He didn't, you know," he asked her in a gentler voice. She shook her head, still breathing fast and wiping the tears from her cheeks. "No. He didn't," she admitted, still very shaken. "What do we do now?" Hiccup went to the window and opened it, shoving it wide open. There was the garage roof, a few yards down and almost directly below the bathroom. A blast of cold air hit his face and he glanced around. The garage was far enough to the side of the house that they could sneak down the other side and make it to the road unseen. He beckoned her over. "Do you think you can make that?" She peered down in shock, then read his face. He was deadly serious. And then she heard hammering at the door and the sounds of a horribly familiar voice. "Haddock. You're a dead man. And the hits just keep coming. I'm surprised the FBI aren't after me as well now," he commented dryly. "No sweat," she said, pulling her heels off. She would have to jump barefoot, but it was better than breaking her neck. With Hiccup's help, she got onto the windowsill and he helped lower her down so she only had a few feet to drop. Even so, she still landed awkwardly and almost lost her footing, but in a flash, Hiccup was by her side, steadying her. "Careful, Miss Perfect," he murmured softly. "It's quite a drop." He peered down and found the water butt. "Step on there and then jump down," he told her, swiftly lowering her down to the barrel. She jumped and hit the ground, biting a groan as the gravel bit into her soles. She glanced up as he landed beside her, pulling her into the shadows and out of view of the window. "What do we do?" she asked, leaned down to pull her shoes back on. He sighed. "Go home," he told her simply. She paused, and then groaned. "I'm staying with Heather, and she's—" "Don't tell me, I'm telepathic like this, she's in there," he asked her sarcastically, jerking his head towards the house. She nodded. Yes," she admitted. He peered round the corner and saw Maggots and Savage still standing by the front door, smoking and chugging spirits. As he watched, Dog's Breath erupted through the front door and started talking animatedly with the others. They immediately straightened up and started scanning the front lawn. He sank back into the shadows with a groan, running his fingers through his messy auburn hair. Astrid inspected him, starting to shiver. "Not good." "Worse," he sighed. "They're looking for you." "But, why?" she asked, her voice wavering. Her teeth began to chatter. With a sigh, he stripped his jacket off and handed it to her and she gratefully put it on, feeling the residual warmth from his body. He sighed. "Which way is your home?" he asked her. "I don't have my key. I am supposed to be staying with Heather." She protested. "Text her and tell her you weren't feeling well and went home," he advised her. "But I don't have my key," she repeated. "And your room doesn't have a window?" he asked her, an amused quirk of his lips challenging her. "Yes, but—" "And you've never climbed out of your window and sneaked out?" he asked her. "No. I would never," she protested hotly. He raised his hands, a teasing smirk on his lips. "Sorry, Miss Perfect, I forgot good girls don't sneak out," he mocked her. "But do they sneak in?" "Well, she began. He sighed. "Look, Astrid, you can either sneak in and say in the morning you weren't feeling well and came home late rather than staying at Heather's, or you can walk up to your front door in your party dress and your heels and explain what happened," he told her. "But please make a choice because it's freezing and I don't want to stand around all night." She nodded. "Home is that way," she said and pointed in the direction that went past the drive. He sighed. "We have to go this way," he explained, gesturing in the opposite direction. "We'll go round the block and then walk home." "Is it far?" She nodded and peered at her feet. Her heels were definitely not made for walking and she would be limping by the time she got home, but she tightened her grasp on her purse and followed Hiccup as they headed off down the road. It never occurred to her not to trust him. The walk was cold and long and her feet felt as if they were on fire by the time they reached her street. She didn't know what to say to her savior, so she kept largely silent and he walked quietly alongside her, his green eyes occasionally flicking up to check there was no one following them. Hiccup was shivering slightly as he walked beside her, his deep red shirt not really offering much protection against the frosty night. Her home was in sight when she stopped and turned to face him. "Why?" she asked him softly. "Why me? Why the others?" He sighed, rubbing his hands together to keep warm. "Since I was unsuspended and everyone thinks I fingered Snot and Dager, I haven't really been in their confidence," he admitted. "But I have no idea why they made me come this evening, maybe to make sure I had a thoroughly miserable time. But they were talking because they wanted to have some fun with you or one of your girlfriends. I think they reckon you're too full of yourselves." Her eyes sparkled with anger and he raised his hands. "Their words, not mine," he protested. "Go on." She growled. "So I think Dog's Breath decided he fancied his chances with you," he admitted. "The others were meant to keep watch. I guess Ruff will be harassing Irette all night, but Cammy was hanging around Dager and I don't know about Heather." She gave a small smile. "I texted Heather to tell her what happened. She'll have told Cammy as well. But in any case, I know Heather will be safe from Dager. She's his half-sister and though he's officially crazy, he wouldn't harm her." "What?" Half-sister. How come I never heard that, he gasped. They don't publicize it, Astrid explained easily. Look, their parents divorced. Heather lives with her mom and her new husband while Dager lives with their father. I think Heather wants not to be Dager's sister at school, and I think he feels the same about her. They're very different people. But he wouldn't hurt her. Shame it doesn't extend to you, he muttered as they peered at the dark house. Which one is yours? She led him round back and pointed to a window with a trellis below, smothered in Virginia creeper. He swarmed up the trellis and tested her window, managing to fiddle it open. Then he helped her up and into the bedroom. She kicked her painful shoes off, clicked the bedside lamp on, and immediately felt awkward. Hiccup Haddock was standing in her bedroom by the window, lanky, tall and skinny, hair disheveled, looking distinctly nervous in his red shirt and dark jeans. His emerald eyes darted around the neat room, the desk by the wall neatly arranged with computer and a shelf of books, the bed by the window but not directly against, and a small sink and washstand occupying another corner. The walls were a pale blue and the carpet a homely beige. She took his jacket off and handed it to him, and he wordlessly put it on. He almost looked relieved to swing his leg over the windowsill. Wait, will you be okay getting home? She asked him. He paused. The house was certain to be locked tight, and his options were limited to the shed or to Gobbers, both of which would be a long cold walk for any equally cold bed. He nodded. I'll be fine, he muttered, looking into the darkness. You could stay? She blurted, astonished at what had come over her. His head snapped round and the expression of shock was almost comical. Not like that, Mr. Purvis, she chided him. On the floor, I mean, if you want. He stared. It is late and very cold, and, are you going to say anything? He swallowed, and a very small but genuine smile tilted his lips. That's kind, he admitted, but it'll cause too much trouble. You've saved me from a lot more, she told him. Just don't let my mom see you. She grabbed one of her pillows and 2 rugs from the bed. Here. She tossed them to him, and slowly, he swung his leg back into the room, quietly closing the window and pulling the curtains closed. I could be a mass rapist, he suggested. After tonight, doubt it, she shot back with a trusting smile. Adios reputation, he muttered, but gave a small smile and shrugged his jacket off. She grabbed some pajamas and headed for the door. She smiled at his quirked eyebrow. I'm changing the bathroom, Mr. Purvis, and I'll leave Mom a note so she doesn't freak when she finds me here in the morning. He smiled and set to making his little nest. But when she returned, 10 minutes later, with washed face, clean teeth and hair loosely braided for the night, all she heard was quiet breathing, and when she looked in the gap between the bed and her window, she found him wrapped in a blanket, curled up on her floor, peacefully asleep. Chapter 23, Sunday morning. Chapter text. Astrid awoke almost in a panic as her mother stuck her head in the room and gave a smile. Wake up, Astrid, she announced. Time to get moving. Ingrid walked into the room without hesitating or permission and firmly pulled the curtains back, turning to her daughter. She paused and reached down, lifting a pillow. What's this doing on the floor? She asked with a frown. Oh, I couldn't get comfortable, so I tried without it, Astrid sighed, sitting up and stretching and wondering where Hiccup had got to. I'll go for my run later. I feel a bit tired still. Can I get another few minutes? You know your father's rules, Astrid, her mother told her slightly impatiently. Up on time every day, do your exercise, homework on time, no slacking. The girl huffed. And no fun, she added. Ingrid stared at her, and then sighed. I know he seems hard, my love, but it's for your own good, she reminded her. You know, if you keep that straighter average, you'll get that Ivy League place you want. He wants, Astrid muttered. Mom, can't you talk to him? Astrid, I agree with him, Ingrid said firmly. You are our only daughter and we only want the best for you, a degree from a top university so you can have that law career that you always dreamed of, Astrid retorted grumpily. I don't want to be a lawyer. I want a career in sports physiotherapy. Astrid, you must be realistic, her mother reminded her. You are better than that, and Horfusons only want the best. Astrid sighed. Isn't what I want what's best for me? She asked pointedly. Her mother turned to the door and paused, then sighed. I'll bring you breakfast in your room, if you want, she smiled. What would you like? Astrid paused and then smiled. Muesli, scrambled eggs, lots of toast, juice and tea, she said promptly, and Ingrid's eyes widened. Enough for two, she smiled. You'll need a longer run today, can't he have you getting fat? You know what your father says. Astrid's smile immediately evaporated. Yeah, she sighed. Mom, would it be possible to have one single conversation without asking what my father says? Aren't allowed to have any thoughts of my own or wishes of my own or desires of my own. Aren't allowed to be a senior just for once. To have fun. Hang with my friends. Go to parties. Your father has made a huge concession in permitting you to go to the prom, Ingrid told her firmly. Now get up. I'll be up in 10 minutes. Astrid only relaxed when the door closed and collapsed back on the bed. There was a scuffle and Hiccup slid out from under the bed, where he had shot as soon as the door opened. For a brief moment, Astrid looked at him, really looked, and saw the dark auburn hair sticking out in all directions, the bright emerald eyes, amused and pale face with a scattering of faded freckles turned towards her. With his sharp jaw and without his scowl or smirk, she realized he was actually fairly handsome, though she doubted anyone gave him enough attention to appreciate it. Sorry, she sighed. I forgot Mom always comes in and has no boundaries when it comes to my personal space. He stretched, his neck cracking, and grimaced. Sleeping on the floor couldn't have been comfortable, but he didn't complain. Well, I'm used to rude awakenings as well, he admitted. Kinda guessed you didn't want me to be found here. She face-palmed. Oh no, she sighed. I would literally never hear the end of it. I think my parents think boys are spawn of the devil. To be fair, most of the school share that opinion of me as well, he sighed, running his fingers through his tousled hair. It only made it look more wild. She stared at him. So why, she asked him. I mean, why did you help me, she asked. We're not friends, I haven't exactly been kind to you, you could just have walked away. He stared up at her, then rubbed the back of his neck. He looked self-conscious. Hey, I may be a smartass and not really care about school, but that doesn't mean I am prepared to stand back and let you or anyone be deflowered by dog's breath, he told her. Deflowered? I read, he protested at her amused tone. Would you rather I just said raped? Her smile faded and she wrapped her arms around her body. She shook her head. Sometimes, I think my dad is right, she sighed as he scrambled to his knees. He shook his head. Actually, I think you are, he told her calmly. You get to be a senior once. You get to spend time with friends and hang out and have fun once. If you waste that chance, it never comes back again. She looked at him and sighed. Won't your parents be worried, she asked. Do I frickin' look like I'm phoning home, he asked her sharply. You had me taped. No one cares. Her eyes widened in sympathy and she looked at him. I'm sorry, she said, and he looked up, searching for sarcasm, but finding none. Yeah, well, sucks to be me, he admitted, and then stiffened. Steps were closing and he slid under the bed again as Ingrid walked in and slid a tray onto the desk. Come on, move yourself, she told her daughter. Do you want your father to catch you still in bed? Astrid sighed and shook her head, reaching for the covers and swinging her legs out. Mom, a little privacy, she asked, and Ingrid left with a grin. Instantly, Astrid was up, locking the door and resting her back against the door, breathing hard. It's okay, she sighed as Hiccup emerged again. Guess that's my cue to leave, he said, but she grabbed his arm and pulled him to the desk. No muesli's mine, the rest is for you, she told him, and his eyes widened. What? He asked her in shock. Well, least you deserve, she told him with a smile, grabbing the bowl and spoon and sitting cross-legged on the bed. Hiccup stared at her in shock, then nodded warily. Thanks. He said and sat at the desk, tucking in hungrily. He cast her a few glances as he wolfed the lot, seeing her watch him thoughtfully. Feeling a little self-conscious here, to be honest, he admitted as she slowly finished her muesli. I've never had a boy in my bedroom before, she admitted, and he smirked. So I'm your first, he teased her, munching toast. She blushed. Oh gods, as long as Ruff never hears about this, she sighed, and he slurped the tea, wiping his mouth on the back of his hand. And that would be a bad thing, he asked her lightly. I have a reputation to maintain, she reminded him tartly. Me too, though this could really boost my popularity. What do you think? Spending the night with Miss Perfect class president. She flushed more angrily. I really hate that name, she snapped. And I hate being called useless, he reminded her. In case you hadn't noticed, I've stopped calling you that since I found out you weren't, she reminded him. He slammed the mug down and rose. I never was, he smirked. Then he visibly calmed down. Look, Astrid, I am really grateful for the warm bed and breakfast, but I ought go. I've got work. You work, she said, her voice astonished. Yeah, well, don't wanna stay in Berk forever, he told her. I work in a garage, the Forge. Have for years. About the only place I'm happy, to be honest. My dad won't allow me to get a job, she sighed. Says it would distract me from my studies. Well. He really has a stick up his ass, doesn't he, he commented. Try it. I've never regretted it. And he grinned, his slightly lopsided smile sending a little thrill down her spine. Then he winked and ruined the illusion as he rose and walked to the window. Hiccup. Yeah. Thanks. I really mean it, she told him. He sighed as he swung his leg over the windowsill. I'll believe that when you don't blank me on Monday, he said and jumped down. She walked to the window, seeing him stuff his hands in his pockets in the cold morning and bury his chin in his coat, then start the long trudge into town and gobber. She closed the window and headed for the shower, his words rolling around her head. No one cares. Chapter 24, Going Soft. Chapter text. Astrid found herself looking out for Hiccup on Monday morning while, of course, trying not to look as if she was watching for him. Cammy, Ruff and Heather were full of tales from the party, and Heather was profusely apologetic that she had left Astrid alone to go to the bathroom. Cammy had almost got off with Dager, but he had upped and left shortly after Astrid left, apparently in a bad mood, and Ruff was absolutely furious that one of her friends had been attacked at the party. She was looking out for Dog's Breath to give him a piece of her mind, though Astrid had wryly noted he wouldn't know what to do with it. So how did you get away? Cammy asked carefully, and Astrid huffed. She didn't really want to think back to that terrifying experience, but she nodded. Not much to say, she shrugged. I was being dragged into Tuff's bedroom by Dog's Breath and I was completely unable to get free. And then a student burst into the room and hit him with a chair. He grabbed me and we climbed out the bathroom window and he walked me home. Details, sis, Ruff urged her. Though that explains why the bathroom door was kicked in. Who was this hero? I didn't recognize him, Astrid murmured coyly. Maybe he was a junior. No, details. Ruff insisted. Descriptions. Names. Was he hot? Astrid blushed, recalling her brief inspection of Hiccup in her bedroom. Oh. Ruff teased her and the embarrassed blonde swatted at her. He was, well, a bit skinny but pretty light on his feet, brownish hair, kinda cute. She muttered. Cammy and Heather shared a look. Oh. My. Gods. Cammy giggled. Astrid is blushing. I do believing she's crushing on her hero. I'm not, she snapped, her eyes sparkling. Look, it was really horrible and frightening and this guy bursts in and saves me. And I'm just grateful because he came when no one else did. Her glare silenced the others and there were mumbled apologies, but she could see Cammy and Ruff sharing a look and knew she wouldn't hear the end of this. And then Hiccup walked past, his head down and shoulders hunched, bag slung over one casually. His dark auburn hair was ruffled from the fairly strong breeze and his cheeks were reddened. His emerald eyes flicked up, to meet Astrid's, and for a second she considered what to do. And then she smiled and nodded to him. He gave a tiny nod in reply and then looked away, continuing on his way to whispers and sneers. Heather stared at her in astonishment. Did you just smile at Hiccup Haddock? She asked, and Astrid started. She nodded. Why? Her friend asked her. Astrid turned to her locker, fished out what she needed for her first couple of classes and slammed it closed. Because of something my mom said to me, which I think is very true, she said thoughtfully. He's a human being and no one is all bad. Hello. Hiccup Haddock we're speaking about. Ruff reminded her snarkily. I think he may be totally completely all bad. Astrid sighed. Or he may have things going on in his life that we don't know anything about, she added. Wait, are you going soft on us, sister? Cammy asked her fiercely. No, I'm acting like an adult, she retorted. There are more than enough idiots who are shouting at and gossiping about him. Even his friends think he's rolled on him. When he looked at me, it cost nothing to smile, but it might make his day better. Heather stared at her, and then nodded. That's why you're president, she murmured with a mildly impressed look, staring after the tall, hunched shape. But I seriously doubt a smile will make his day any better. Oh. He had needed to steel himself before he walked into the hallway, mentally preparing himself for another fun day. He had put off going back home as much as possible, spending the day with Gobber working and having another hefty meal with the two-limbed mechanic. But when he had finally arrived home, Alvin had shouted at him for staying out overnight, slapped him and sent him to his room, though the look of disappointment on his mother's face had hurt him more. And he had 3 days to find out who had given up Dager and Snotlout or face Dager and his gang, if they didn't decide to just jump him before. He had no idea how they crew would respond to his rescue of Astrid. So he had not held much hope as he walked through to the blizzard of sneers and whispers, and as he saw Astrid, he had almost not even looked at her. But he just wanted to hope she would keep her word, and he had flicked his gaze across, seeing her stare at him for a long moment, and then smile. It had been like the sun coming out, and he had felt a tiny surge of warmth in his chest at the acknowledgement, knowing it couldn't last, knowing she wouldn't speak to him or interact with him, but she had not blanked him. He offered a small nod of acknowledgement at the smile and then continued on his way, knowing they weren't friends, but for one moment, she wasn't his enemy either. And then he had to carry on, his senses on edge as he headed towards his locker. So far, there was no sign of Dog's Breath or the others, but he made sure he didn't hang around. Of course, they wouldn't hesitate to beat him up in the middle of the hall if they really wanted to, but he knew he was probably safer with the other students than away on his own. With a sigh, he slammed his locker and headed to class. He was earlier than usual, but he had deliberately come before class because there was something he had to do, and for this, he needed to be alone. It was something personal and very, very important. Miss Sylvester was already in the art classroom, preparing for the morning's lesson when he tentatively opened the door. She looked up as she saw him enter and straightened up, her eyes hard. He paused, then walked up to her. "You are still banned from this class, Mr. Haddock," she told him firmly. He nodded. I wanted to speak to you about that, Miss Sylvester," he said self-consciously, rubbing the back of his neck. His green eyes darted around the room and he found he was feeling nervous. I wanted to apologize for my behavior," he said hurriedly. I was very rude, and I'm sorry." He paused. "Please forgive me." The teacher looked at him, her cool eyes sweeping over his skinny shape, fidgeting with anxiety, and very different to the mildly indifferent and moody young man she was used to. "Why?" she asked him sternly. "Every other teacher complains about you." Hiccup. His green gaze flicked up and he felt his heart sink. "And I thought that they were wrong, but your behavior was completely unacceptable." I know," he said softly, taking a small step forward. And I know there is no excuse. I was just really angry, because, well, Astrid just hasn't treated me fairly." Miss Sylvester stared at his face and saw him struggle to explain himself. "That's no excuse," she told him shortly, and he took a deep breath. It's a reason," he said awkwardly. "I mean, when someone calls you useless and tries to get you thrown out of the only class you care about, why should you help them? Why should I help someone who still treated me like shit even when I had already helped her?" He flung his arms up. "I'm not a saint, Miss Sylvester. Totally not. But I never wanted to be rude to you. You really are the only person here who treats me like a real person, not a nuisance. And I am really sorry, because this is the only class I actually want to come to. And I would do anything to be allowed back." "Mr. Treacher suggested I should expel you permanently," she told him, and he stiffened. He felt as if the wind had been knocked out of him. He growled and he turned away. "Sorry to have wasted your time." He reached for the door handle and she took a step forward. "Hiccup, wait," she said sharply, and he stiffened. "I guess you and the principal don't get on." "You have no idea," he thought bitterly, but nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His hand on the handle was trembling and saw it, her face moving into a sympathetic expression. She walked to his side and he turned to face her. No, he confirmed gruffly. You are a talented student and I think you are sorry for your conduct, she told him slowly. He hardly dared breathe but nodded slightly. So I will allow you back into the class, on one condition. What? He asked warily, his emerald eyes wide with concern. She patted his shoulder. Nothing difficult, she told him gently. I will readmit you to the class if you agree to tutoring Miss Horferson. Chapter 25, No Second Chance. Chapter text. Hiccup nodded dumbly, the shock and dizziness of being forgiven striking him dumb. Maybe if he had spoke to Miss Sylvester before the weekend, he would have protested, but after Saturday, and especially the illuminating Sunday morning, he had a better understanding of Astrid's life. And she had smiled at him. Thank you, he said self-consciously and gave a small smile. Don't make me regret it, she told him with a smile as the door opened and the class began to pour in. Hiccup shook his head. You won't. He promised as the class took their seats and stared expectantly. He stared at his fellow students and took a breath. Every eye on him was hostile and he felt very exposed. I wanna apologize for my behavior last week, and I kinda wanna ask for your forgiveness, well yes, there you are. There was a wall of blank stares at his stumbling apology and he swallowed, feeling incredibly awkward. Thank you, Mr. Haddock. Take your seat now, Miss Sylvester announced when her class remained silent. He nodded and swiftly headed to the back of the class, his cheeks gently warmed with embarrassment. He sank in his chair and stared at the desk. At the end of class, Miss Sylvester kept him back and beckoned Astrid. Hiccup sighed, this was the hardest part. Mr. Haddock, is there something you want to say to Miss Horferson? She probed. He swallowed. Yeah, he suggested. He took a small breath. I owe you an apology, I shouldn't have shouted at you, and if you still want a tutor, I'm willing to help. Astrid stared at him in shock, there was a faint flush on his cheeks and he was looking very embarrassed and fidgety. And he had stammered and stumbled through the offer, not bearing much resemblance to the cocky and sarcastic boy she was used to. She gave him a small smile and nodded. Apology accepted, she said calmly. How could she say anything else? Against all expectations, he had burst in and saved her during the party and that was apology enough for his not unfounded accusations. And, I would be grateful for any help and tutoring you can offer. Hiccup rubbed the back of his neck self-consciously. Any day, my calendar really isn't busy, except, I have detention every day, so if you can wait, I could afterwards. He looked up at the teacher. If you don't mind. Miss Sylvester nodded. You know you can come here anytime, Hiccup, she said gently. Now scoot. You'll be late for class. Astrid rose immediately, nodding and heading for the door. Hiccup followed her, his head down. She was waiting for him and he looked up in surprise as she fell into step beside him. If we arrive together, we may not get into so much trouble, she reminded him, and he shrugged. It's math next and Mr. Mildew hates me anyway, he shrugged. You do realize you're actually really good at math, she reminded him, and he cocked a cynical green eye at her. Yeah, make fun of me, he snooked. No, she argued calmly. Since the incident your grades are really good. I think you're tying top of class at the moment. With me. He rolled his eyes. Yeah, big joke, he scoffed. No joke, she retorted. No matter how you might see it, you're acing math. He sighed. Can we change the subject? He huffed and headed up the stairs, long legs taking them 3 at a time with her speeding up beside him. Fine, she said mollifyingly. Tutoring. Any day, take your pick. I can stay after your detention, I tend to have cheer practice or athletics most days. How about tonight? He flicked another look at her, then nodded. I'll see you at the art classroom after detention, he said, and opened the door to math, standing back to allow Astrid to enter, then following her in. Mr. Mildew looked up, his mean eyes narrowing in delight at the sight of his favorite target entering late. Good of you to join us, Haddock, he sneered. And Miss Horferson. What have you been doing with this no-good loser? Astrid felt a jolt of anger run though her butt fought to remain calm. I'm sorry, Mr. Mildew, but Miss Sylvester asked us to stay back after art class, she explained. The teacher turned his gaze on Hiccup. What she said, he said sullenly, and Mildew's face creased into an even more unpleasant scowl. Astrid stared at him in concern, wondering if she was going to get into trouble just by association. "Sit down, Miss Horferson," the teacher commanded, and she slid, relieved, into her usual front row seat, mere feet from the teacher, who was still glaring at the tall, moody shape of Hiccup. "And you, how many times late is this? You're the math teacher, you count." Hiccup snicked back. "It's not that big of a deal. I turned up, didn't I? I could have just cut class and done something more interesting, maybe staring at a wall or sleeping. You really are no respect, do you?" Mildew sneered. "For you, not really," Hiccup admitted casually. "Then take your lack of respect and present it to Mr. Treacher, you insolent little bastard." Mildew snapped. He stabbed his finger hard in the boy's chest. "Go on, Git." Astrid raised her hand tentatively. Mildew glared at her. "What, Miss Horferson?" Sir, we really were held back by Miss Sylvester," she began, but he turned to her angrily. "It doesn't matter," he growled. "Shut up or I'll send you along with him." Her eyes widened and Hiccup glanced at her in shock. It was the first time of years that anyone had even tried to stand up for him. He shook his head very slightly and she subsided. "Yes, sir," she mumbled, blushing. Mildew glared at her, then turned back to the boy. "And you, what the fuck are you doing here still? Get out of my class." Hiccup nodded and managed a small smile. "Finally something we agree on," he said, turning to the door, then slamming the door behind him. Mildew turned to his absolutely silent class in a rage. "Turn to page 57," he growled. "I want you to work through the calculations there, and for homework, I want you to work through pages 58-61. The entire class felt like groaning. The class task was hard enough, but the homework would take hours. But with Mildew in this mood, no one made a sound and they turned to their work, hoping he would ignore them for the rest of the class. And Astrid felt shocked as she bent over her workbook at the vindictiveness in the teacher's tone and the way he had leapt at the chance to punish the boy. She frowned and tried to concentrate, knowing Mildew would be marking hard, but she was good at math, almost as good at Hiccup, she admitted silently. But her mind slid back to the look in his eyes, the briefest of flashes of hurt and resignation at Mildew's words when she had been dismissed and sent back to her seat. It seemed, no matter what he did, he would never be forgiven, never be given a second chance. And worse, he had accepted that. Oh. He was actually standing outside the door, his head resting back against the wall and anger and hurt tightening his chest. He really hated Mildew, really wanted to lash out, but he knew that would only get him in worse trouble. And he had been shocked that Astrid had tried to intervene on his behalf. It may have been self-preservation, but she had already been let off the hook and she had risked Mildew's ire to try to help him out. He sighed. It hadn't worked, but it had felt nice. He slammed his head back against the wall, teeth gritted and eyes closed. Mildew would have contacted Alvin and he would be waiting, again. He opened his green eyes. Fuck it. He wasn't going. If Al wanted to suspend him, he was welcome to. He shoved himself upright and headed back to his locker, deciding to grab his bag and head out. In fact, he was so distracted he didn't hear the approaching steps until it was far too late. There you are. It was Dog's Breath, with the entire crew, and he looked mad. I wanna talk with you, he said. Chapter 26, Are We Friends? Chapter text. His eyes widened as he started at the huge boy lumbering towards him, a very ugly expression on Dog's Breath's face. He gestured to his head, bruising over his forehead and stitches over an eyebrow. This is your fault, he snarled. Hiccup backed up a pace. Really, he shot back. I think your hideous face matches your charming personality, neither of which are down to me. I think you have to blame genetics for your ugly mug. You did this. Dog's Breath snarled, slapping his meaty fist into his palm. Technically, it was the chair. Hiccup pointed out, and the gang all closed on him. Hiccup glanced beyond them, felt the locker at his back and knew this wasn't going to go well, but every eye was on him. Good morning, Mr. Grimborn, he said brightly, and as the others spun in shock, Hiccup ran. There was no teacher, of course, but Hiccup had chosen one of the few members of staff that they all avoided crossing. By the time they had reacted, he was halfway down the hole and still accelerating. But as he heard them follow, he realized the flaw in his plan. They were all athletes, much faster and stronger than he was. He had the element of surprise, but beyond that, it was 4-on-1 and they were closing. He scrambled up the stairs, grabbing the rail and hauling himself up. He could hear them close and he sprinted hard until he reached the end of the hall, knowing there was only one place that could save him. He stumbled and almost fell down the steps and dashed to Alvin's office, panting hard and trying to grin at Marcia. The woman pursed her lips in annoyance. "You again," she said sharply. "I just love our chats," he grinned. "I'm sure Mr. Mildew will have called, I'll see myself in." And before she could answer, he burst into the office, and found it empty. He glanced around in shock, then smiled, flipping the lock on the door. "Mr. Treacher, yes, me again." He began loudly, walking swiftly to the desk and rifling through the papers. He found a note about his behavior in the math class, written in Marcia's curly hand, and he smiled, ripping it up and dumping it in the trash. Then he looked up. He couldn't hide here all day, and at some point, Alvin would come back and he would be in real trouble. Quietly, he dropped every alternate paper from the desk in the trash, erased his open schedule from the computer and carefully loosened the attachments on his chair. Finally, he quietly opened the window, unlocked the door and then leapt out into the flower bed beneath the window, as he heard Alvin's voice growl at the waiting crew. He scampered away, rounding the corner just before the huge bearded head poked out, searching for the boy, but Hiccup was long gone. He spent most of the morning in Gobber's shop, fixing a particularly stubborn Toyota that kept misfiring. The mechanic grinned in appreciation at the help, knowing the boy should be in school but understanding he needed to lose himself in a tricky mechanical problem rather than dwell on the dark place his life had become. But he had a problem that he couldn't help focusing on: Astrid. He had been asked to tutor her and he had given his word. And while he had no intention of keeping his word to Alvin, it was a different matter to his mom, Gobber, and Miss Sylvester. He straightened up, wiping his hands on a greasy rag and nodding to Gobber, who turned the engine over. Smooth as a baby's backside. He grinned as it hummed softly. Hiccup slammed the hood down and sighed. "If only everything was that simple," he commented, and the mechanic stared at him. "Lad, I could nae fix that, you only got it because you kept at it. You know there's a place for ye here whenever ye need it," he assured the lad, and Hiccup slowly hopped up to sit on the workbench. "Yeah, well, I might take you up on that," he sighed. "The way things are going, I'll be out of home before Snoggletog and living in the back of the shop with Toothless." Gobber fished in the drawer and located a packet of sandwiches. They consisted solely of a slab of cheese between two slices of bread, but Hiccup accepted the one he was offered hungrily and munched rapidly through it. The older man looked at him with sad eyes, feeling his heart sink. "Nae breakfast, laddie?" he asked. Hiccup nodded, his shoulders hunched as he devoured the food in a few bites. Gobber grinned and handed his own sandwich over, but Hiccup refused, his green eyes almost looking longingly at his friend's lunch, but he stubbornly shook his head. "Gobber, I can't steal your lunch," he said quietly, hopping down to the floor. "I'd better get back. See ya tomorrow." "Laddie, I wish ye would tell someone about your problems," the mechanic sighed. "I hate seeing you like this." Hiccup quirked a lopsided smile. "The second Mom wants to leave with me, I'm out of that house," he promised. "Until then, I look after her, as I promised Dad." And he gave Toothless a little pat and headed out the back door. He sighed as the cold air hit him and he stuffed his hands on his pockets. Then he started to walk back to the school, calculating that he was going to arrive just after lunch so he would be able to sneak into class and make his detention, and be there for Astrid. He shook his head. He was only doing this because Miss Sylvester had asked him, otherwise he would stay away from the school for the moment. He flipped his phone into his hand and dialed Dager, walking slowly as he headed back to the school. "Yeah." Dager's voice was unfriendly. "Dag, I need to talk," Hiccup said without preamble. "Kinda busy," Fishbone, Dager said dismissively. "Then tell me why the crew are on my ass." Hiccup asked him shortly. "Dog and Maggots along with Savage and Thug are chasing me to kick my ass." "Why?" There was a pause. "You really don't know?" Dager asked incredulously. "Well, I can kinda guess, but what the fuck?" Hiccup snapped, stopping mid-stride and glaring. You hit Dog's breath over the head with a chair. He was going to rape a girl. Hiccup spat, his entire body tense. A girl. Come on, Hick. It was that uptight bitch, Astrid Horferson. It would have done her good. And if it had been Heather? Hiccup growled. It wasn't. I wouldn't let that happen to her, Dager told him shortly and hypocritically. It shouldn't happen to anyone. Hiccup shouted at him. Gods, Dag. How can you possibly think this is okay? Dog is lucky she didn't call the cops. But you attacked him. Dager reminded him. Dager, I am your friend and I need you to make him back off. Hiccup said angrily. For Odin's sake. I couldn't let him do that to anyone. Are you friends with her? Dager sneered. Of course not. Hiccup shouted. I thought I was friends with you. And I have enough problems without Dog coming to kick my ass. Can you stop him? Hick, are we friends? Dager asked him softly over the line. He tensed, his eyes widening in shock. He felt ice run down his spine and took a slow breath. Yes, he said roughly. Come on, Dag, it's been 3 years. And yet, you sold us out to Mr. Treacher, Dager hissed. I told you never happened. Hiccup shouted. Then who did? Dager roared back at him. I don't know. Hiccup protested angrily. Look, you have to trust me. How can you believe? Fishbone, if you don't have a name by the time I get back, I have to believe what I know, Dager said coldly and cut the line. Hiccup stared at the phone and screamed in fury, then stomped back towards the school. Today had started with a smile, but now, he was definitely on Dager's hit list. His so-called friends were after him and he still had to tutor Astrid, which he hadn't got a clue about. Lost in thought, he didn't pay much attention as he trotted back into the school, straight into Alvin. Chapter 27, You Don't Have to Do This. Chapter text. A hand grabbed his shoulder before he could break away and he winced as the fingers dug hard into his flesh. He stared up into the furious face and forced his own expression to adopt a smile. Oh, hi Al, he said with forced cheerfulness. Fancy seeing you here. What are you doing out of class, Hiccup? Alvin growled, tightening his grip. The boy stiffened and he grimaced. Just getting a little fresh air, Hiccup said lightly. You gotta do something about that, Al. Alvin just turned, dragging the still protesting boy along the hall and towards his office. Marcia didn't even look up as Alvin opened the door and shoved Hiccup in, finally releasing the boy's arm. Hiccup glared at him, rubbing his shoulder and knowing it would bruise. You know, I've been looking for you, Alvin growled, moving to his desk. I heard you was in me office earlier, but you'd scarpered out of the window when I got back. And Mr. Mildew tells me you've been insubordinate again. Well, much as I hate to say, Mildew is a terrible teacher, Hiccup riposted. I was held back in the previous class and asked to help Astrid Horferson, and when we arrived together, he believed her and then chewed me out in front of the class. He sent me to your office, so I went there, you weren't there, so I left. The slap echoed round the room and Hiccup blinked, staring at Alvin. Not sure that's in the rules, Al, he mumbled, forcing himself not to press a hand to his stinging cheek. Alvin lunged forward and grabbed his hair, tugging his head back and leaning close, glaring into the wide green eyes. You know, this is almost the last chance, Hiccup, he sneered. If you don't pull yourself together, boy, I'll later kick you out of high school, and when that happens, you're out on the streets. The boy winced. You've been wanting that, except I think Mom wouldn't be too happy about it. He protested softly. You know, I think your mother is getting pretty sick of your attitude and your trouble, boy. Alvin sneered. So you can do what you want, but you're not welcome in the house tonight. If you get through tomorrow without causing trouble, you'll be allowed home tomorrow night. But any more trouble and you'll later look out for yourself, until you learn to behave. Hiccup swallowed, shaking his head slightly. You can't. He protested. If Mom finds out. The slap knocked him to the ground and he stared up in shock, his head spinning. How is she going to find out? Alvin sneered. I won't let you in, and for all she knows, it's your decision to not come home. You're leaving her. Mom would never. He mouthed. Don't make her choose, boy, because you wouldn't like the outcome, he sneered, then walked to his desk. Now get out you AV classes and detention. If you're cut class again, you'll never see your mother again. Hiccup scrambled up, his cheek scarlet from the slaps, and left, hearing the creak and a crash as the chair collapsed under Alvin's bulk, but even the success of his trap couldn't raise his spirits. He stared back at the door, hearing Alvin cursing loudly, and walked slowly towards his class. He paused and picked up his phone. His finger hovered over the number for home, and then he put it away and walked to class, entering late with a mumbled apology. He was only allowed to sit when he explained that he had already seen Mr. Treacher, but he paid little attention to the poetry they were studying. "Mr. Haddock, have you heard a word I said?" Mr. Larson asked. He was a short, stocky man with a large beard and a kindly face, except where Hiccup was concerned. You just asked if I was listening," he replied sullenly. "I'd give you detention, but I gather you are already booked into detention until Snoggletog," Larson growled, "so you are to write an appraisal of poem you should have been studying today and its relevance to modern attitudes." "Yeah, like that's gonna be useful," Hiccup grumbled. "Not less than 2,000 words," Larson said coldly. Hiccup blinked and bit back the answer he wanted to give. His day was bad enough without making anything worse. He stared at the page and ran his fingers through his hair, dropping back into his silent slump. Finally, he headed through to detention, his assignment still rolling around his head and trying to think of anything to do with Astrid. Hiccup. He stopped and turned to look at her, seeing her azure eyes inspect him as she paused on her way to practice. "I'll see you in the art classroom afterwards." He nodded. "I'll be there," he promised, and vanished into detention. Oh. Astrid had to concentrate hard during practice, but she still smacked Ruff in the face and turned into Cammy, causing both to sprawl to the floor in a heap. Cammy shoved her off with a huff and glared. "Your head is all over the place, Ast," she said as Astrid smiled apologetically. "Sorry," she sighed. "It's just, I've got my first session being tutored by Hiccup Haddock after this, and I guess I'm a bit nervous." The entire room went silent, and then there was an eruption of protests. "Hiccup Haddock? What can he teach you apart from sarcasm and being late? And being a snitch?" Astrid flushed, but Ruff caught the pink coloration to her cheeks and pointed, roaring with laughter. "Are you blushing?" she teased. "You are so dead." Astrid shouted and raced after her. Ruff tried to get away, but Astrid flipped her and straddled her waist, pinning her. "Do I look like I'm blushing or anything?" she growled. No," Ruff confessed nervously. The famous Horferson temper was rarely seen but was still scary close up. "I needed a tutor for art and Hiccup Haddock was the only candidate," she announced sternly. "He's not a friend, and frankly he's not someone I want anything to do with, but grades come first." She got up and offered Ruff her hand, dragging her up. "Now come on, girls, it's Visithug on Friday and we need to kill them. Go Vikings!" Oh. Hiccup left detention last, head down, as he walked slowly towards the art classroom. He had spent most of detention trying to work out what he could do for Astrid and had finally decided to watch her draw. At least it would give him a clue to her standard and thinking, even though he had guessed she was direct and very limited in her ability for abstract thought. He never saw the hands that hold him back, one slapping over his mouth and others pinning his arms. He tried to cry out, though the deserted corridors held no hope of rescue, and he struggled with all his might. He heard voices and saw Savage and Thuggery speed past as they hit the stairs, and headed down. In the basement, he was finally released and he staggered back, green eyes desperately looking for some way to escape, but he was in the corridor by the boiler room with no way out except past the others. Hey gee guys," he said rapidly, breathing fast. "There was no way out, no avoiding this. You don't have to do this." And then he heard the footsteps behind him. "Yes, I think we do," said Dager. Chapter 28, No One to Care. Chapter text. Astrid waited for 20 minutes before giving up, huffing and rolling her eyes at being let down. Not that she had really expected him to honor his deal, but she had put up with constant ribbing about meeting with her new boyfriend for the rest of practice, and for him to blow her off, well, she'd give him a piece of her mind when she saw him. Sighing, she hefted her bag over her shoulder and turned towards the exit, and then she heard voices. She frowned, ducking into the nearby biology lab as a group of 5 seniors walked confidently past, laughing and joking. She frowned. It was the group Hiccup hung around with, including Dager, who was suspended for another 2 days. What was he doing here? Shame it needed doing, Dager scoffed lightly, but we really can't have someone, especially one of us, interfering. Yeah, Dog's Breath said, his cruel voice sending shivers down her spine, reminding her of those horrific moments back at Ruff's. I've been wanting to teach that skinny sarcastic little twerp a lesson for ages. Well, if he doesn't learn now. Dager left the threat hanging as they swept towards the side door and left. Astrid paused, waiting for another minute to check the hall was clear before emerging, then fearlessly heading in the direction they had come from. She really didn't like to consider what they had been talking about, though the words skinny sarcastic little twerp had her on alert. She was watching and listening, but she wondered if she was wasting her time as she reached the back door of the school, until she heard a small cough. Treading quietly, she headed down the stairs to the basement, tense and anxious as she heard the sounds of movement, and then a groan. Tentatively, she opened the door, and then she saw him. He was trying to push himself up on his arms, head bowed and auburn hair wild. There were bloodstains on his clothes and she gasped. Breathing hard, he just managed to lift his head, revealing a battered and blooded face. Hiccup. What happened? She asked in shock. His face twitched. Let me think. He mumbled thickly. Had a discussion with the boys. He coughed. I don't think they like me very much. Then his arms buckled and he collapsed. Astrid raced forward and helped him to sit up, wincing at his bruises. I'm sorry, she said stupidly, and he looked at her. Not your fault, he groaned, raising a hand to his lip and peering drunkenly at the blood on his fingers. I made a choice. She slid an arm round his shoulders. Can you walk? She asked him gently. No sweat. He mumbled, attempting a smile. But it took all Astrid's strength to manhandle him to his feet, and he looked very wobbly. Wow, why's the room moving? He murmured, his legs buckling. She lunged forward and caught him, feeling his arms tighten reflexively around her. How are you going to get home? She asked him. Is there anyone I can call? He stilled for a moment and then shook his head. No, he said softly. No one to care. No one at all, she pressed. He tried to pull away from her, but a wave of dizziness almost overwhelmed him. No, he murmured. Then we should take you to hospital. She tried, but he did pull away from her then. No, he said quietly. Can't, they'd ask questions. She stared in shock, then sighed. I can't leave you, she told him shortly. Don't worry, Miss Perfect, I won't die or anything. He told her thickly, staggering towards the door. He reached it, tried to open it and landed flat on his face. She sighed and walked to his side, crouching down and watching him begin the long process of picking himself up. Can you guarantee that? She asked pointedly. He grimaced. How much of a guarantee do you want? He muttered, wincing. She helped him up and threw her arm around him, helping drag him to the steps and gradually pull him up. This isn't how I imagined my first session being tutored, she grumbled as they slowly limped up the stairs. Hiccup leaned against her and paused. He gestured vaguely at his face and sighed. Can't you tell this is art? He groaned as they reached the ground floor. She huffed. Hiccup, this is not art, she told him off tartly. More like health class, or maybe first aid. They reached his locker and he painfully grabbed his bag. She watched him quietly sling it over his shoulder and wobble. Okay, this is stupid, she announced in exasperation. I'm not leaving you here. I'll give you a lift home. No, he said suddenly, his eyes wide. I can't go home like this. I can't go home, period. My stepdad doesn't want me. Won't your parents worry if you just stay out? She pressed. He shook his head. Mom would, but not my stepdad, he admitted. And is there really no one you can stay with? Astrid asked him gently. His head snapped up and his green gaze darkened. My friends did this, he told her bitterly. And she stared. While her father was irritating and overbearing, she knew he would be worried and heartbroken if she didn't come home without warning. What must Hiccup's family be like? She stared at him and opened her mouth to speak when he fished out his phone. There is one person, maybe, he mumbled and thumbed in the familiar number. It took 6 rings before Gobber answered. Laddie. What can I do for ye? The mechanic bellowed down the phone. Hiccup winced. Gobber really didn't do quiet very well and he had to hold the phone away from his ear. The bellowing was making the pounding in his head even worse. He hesitated for a second. I was wondering if I could maybe stay with you, he managed thickly. There was a pause that instantly had him on edge and he heard a deep intake of breath. Gobber's voice was sad. Oh laddie, I'm so sorry but I'm home right now. He murmured. There's been a flood from the apartment above mine. My bedroom soaked and the couch. Hiccup chewed his lip and sagged. No problem, Gobber. It was just a thought, he said quietly. Hope it gets fixed soon. And he stared at the phone, feeling an unfamiliar feeling of dislocation. Even Gobber had let him down, though he knew the man would have helped if he had anywhere to put the boy. And the only place he could stay was the garage. See, no need to worry, he told Astrid, who was staring at him incredulously. So where are you staying? She demanded. He shrugged and shook his head. I'll find somewhere, he mumbled and turned unsteadily towards the door. She walked at his side and sighed, then glanced at him. Since the phone call, his shoulders had slumped and he looked completely defeated. You could stay at my house, she said suddenly, and he stared at her in shock. What? He mumbled. She stared back into his astonished green eyes. You can stay with me. Chapter 29, We Aren't Friends. Chapter text. Honestly, Hiccup wouldn't have been more astonished if Astrid had claimed to be a chicken. Were his ears working properly or was he still concussed after the beating he'd taken? He really didn't know. It wasn't as if today could get much worse, to be frank. Alvin had barred him from his home, his go-to person was almost homeless due to a flood at his apartment, and Hiccup's so-called friends had just kicked the crap out of him, including Dager. He stilled, breathing hard. That had actually been truly scary because angry Dager was without any boundaries. And despite every protestation, Dager still insisted that it had to be Hiccup who had rolled on him, and he had taken a lot of delight in beating up the suspected traitor. He blinked. At best, he was facing a very cold night in the garage with Toothless, but he felt his spirits plummet at the thought. He really wanted to go home, to curl in his bed and sleep, and that wasn't happening. He was homeless. The thought hit him hard. He had endured so much to stay with his mom, slaps and beatings and a constant drip of insults that made him finally realize he was worthless and unwanted, maybe even by his only parent. But Velka needed warmth and food and security. She needed the lack of stress that even Alvin provided compared to the desperate straits they had been in before. And if Hiccup was the price she paid. He swallowed and closed his eyes. Well? Astrid asked him, a little impatiently. He rested his hand on the locker. Why? He asked her directly, his voice very wary. I mean, we aren't friends. She looked at him and sighed. That's true, she admitted, but I do owe you. Probably more than one. But won't your parents worry? He asked with a shrug. I mean, I am probably public enemy number 1. If word gets out, well, social suicide would be putting it mildly. Why was she doing it? By making the offer, she had surprised herself. He was someone she tried to avoid because he really represented everything she hated: contempt for authority, contempt for hard work, rudeness, lateness, rebellion. But he looked unhappy. Not the kind of minor annoyance, broken a pen sort of unhappy, but more an underlying uncared for, nowhere to go unhappy. And he wasn't all bad, because it all came back to those horrific moments in Ruff's house, pinned and helpless when he kicked the door open and hit her attacker with a chair. She went back to his words now. You may be a smart ass, but you are a person as well, she admitted. And some of this was because you rescued me, wasn't it? He nodded dumbly. So I owe you. Kinda thought your parents would freak at having a boy over, he reminded her. Spawn of the devil or something. Would it mess up your schedule? Affect your focus? Stop you becoming a hotshot lawyer? She gave a small smile. That wouldn't really be a biggie, she admitted. He painfully dragged his hood up over his head and gave a grimace. Yeah, just another thing I'll be blamed for, he mumbled. She sighed. "Come on, Mom's picking me up," she said and turned to the door. He stared after her, eyes very wary. "Didn't say I was coming with you," he reminded her. She paused and then nodded. "Suit yourself," she said softly. The offer's still there, I mean." He nodded. "Thanks," he murmured as she walked away, then stopped. She turned back to him and beckoned. "Phone," she snapped. He frowned but warily complied. She stared at the basic model and rolled her eyes, then input her number in his contacts and texted herself. Then she handed it back. "I'm under Miss Perfect," she told him dryly and then turned away, flipping her braid over one shoulder as she strode away. He stared at the phone and shook his head, stuffing it in his pocket, and slowly, he headed after her. She had vanished round the corner as he slowly limped along, head down and heart in his boots. He was kicking himself because a huge part of him wanted to go with her, but reality had bitten him hard as he looked at her and realized her parents would send him off like the unwanted wretch he was. I mean, why would the most popular girl in class want to take bad boy Hiccup home, right? He shook his head. It had to be some sort of joke, some way she could make fun of him to the popular kids and just make his life worse. He slowly trailed to the door and stared out, taking a slow breath, until a huge hand grabbed his shoulder. He hissed and craned his neck, to meet Alvin's unpleasant leer. The principal dragged the boy straight down the couple of steps and onto the car park in front of the school. He shoved Hiccup back and the boy stumbled, biting his lip against a groan. Just now, he really didn't have the energy to face Alvin. "Get out!" Alvin sneered. "You can't stay here, Hiccup." Emerald eyes flicked up. "Like I'd want to, Al," he shot back, and the man clenched his fist. "You got someone to stay, boy?" Alvin taunted him. "I've had offers," Hiccup told him, backing up a pace. "Just considering my options." Alvin advanced on him and grabbed at his hood, dragging it down. His big face widened into a nasty smile. "Oh dearie me," he scoffed. "It don't look like your friends are too happy at your—" Hiccup tried to pull away. "At least I have friends," he retorted. Alvin smiled triumphantly. "I don't need friends 'cause I got me wife," he said smugly. "Who are they you got?" Hiccup stared at him, breathing hard and lifting his chin. "My mom," he spat. Alvin grabbed his hair and forced his head back, leaning close. "You know, I think I'll tell her that you just told me you were staying out and didn't even bother to tell her," he threatened. "How do you think she'll feel, boy?" "She knows I love her," he said tightly. "I'm her son, for Thor's sake. And you can't ever replace me in her life." Alvin slapped him hard. "I see you ain't learned a lesson yet, boy. That mouth is gonna get you into trouble." Alvin sneered. Hiccup stared up into his face, wary. The car park was empty and cold, dusk was already falling. "Don't see no one here to pick you up, boy." "I can find my own way," Hiccup shot back, earning himself another slap. "Really, Al? Is that all you've got?" "No," snappy comeback. The next slap snapped his head round and he blinked, his vision smeared with stars. "Don't come by tomorrow neither." Alvin snapped. "You ain't learned, boy. My rules or the street." "You seems to enjoy the street." "Oh joy," Hiccup deadpanned. "Yeah, I'm a man with a plan. Don't worry about me, Al." The principal slapped him again because of the smirk that lifted his bruised lips. "You must really enjoy this." Alvin growled. Hiccup stared into the dark eyes and allowed the smirk to widen. "By the way, Al, how was your chair? Any problems?" The principal glared at him, then lifted his hand and properly hit him hard. They were out of school and no one was around, so the man didn't bother to hold back. The blow echoed as it slammed the boy to the floor, remaining still for a long moment before slowly lifting his head to stare up at him. "That was your—" Alvin sneered. Hiccup gave a small smile from behind his disheveled bangs. "It sounded painful," he smirked. Alvin kicked him. "Don't come home the day after tomorrow neither," he snapped. "You'll come to the door and I will set Screamer on you. It must have been so lucky you found a dog better looking than you." Hiccup sniped. "And old Screamer likes me anyway." Alvin lurched towards him. "I really hope you got somewhere warm, boy. That's another night you're not allowed in." Then he turned away. Slowly, painfully, Hiccup levered himself to a pair of shaky legs, his cheek scarlet with the slaps on top of his other developing bruises. He heard Alvin's Toyota growl into life and pull away as he dragged his hood up again and slowly began to walk down the road. Watching him slowly limp away, Astrid emerged from behind the big oak at the side of the car park. It was where she usually waited for her mom because it was very close to the road, and she had seen the confrontation. And while she hadn't picked up all the words, the louder parts had made it very clear, Alvin knew Hiccup, and it was personal. Chapter 30, Cold as Night. Chapter text. Sitting at the back of the closed-down forge with Toothless curled at his side and munching a burrito he had picked up on the way, Hiccup was trying to ignore the fact he was going to sleep on a floor. There was a patched and oil-stained blanket there which Toothless usually slept on, and the boy had fished his overalls from his locker to act as a pillow. His entire body ached, he was cold, and the knowledge that this was all down to his so-called friends just made him feel worse. To try to distract himself, he went to Gobber's stash in his tiny office too small and cramped to sleep in, boiled the kettle and made himself a coffee. His hands were literally shaking with cold as he grasped the tin cup and settled down. Toothless had snuggled to his side but ended laying across his lap. The boy pressed the cup to his lips and forced himself to swallow. He wasn't sure where Gobber got his coffee, but it smelled and tasted like engine oil and had the added bonus of burning his split and bruised lips. Because he was trembling hard, he forced it down, then hugged Toothless. The dog solemnly licked him in the face, a little whine of affection sounding loudly in the garage. It got colder and colder and the boy drank more coffee, tried to finish his homework and finally curled up tightly, the blanket pulled over his beaten shape, the dog curled carefully around him, his heat leaching into the battered boy. Eventually, exhausted by cold and pain, he drifted into sleep. His eyes snapped open, it was still dark and he could hear scrittering. Toothless was alert, a low growl sounding in his throat. Hiccup paused, and then he heard someone fumbling at the lock, and not in a Gobber being clumsy with the key sort of way. Someone was breaking in. He tried to sit up and bit hard on his lip to stop himself groaning because he had stiffened up completely. But he forced his legs under his body and scrambled to a crouch, his head swinging around. He was acclimatized to the darkness and he could pick out the faint edges of the workbenches and tools in the dim reflected orange light. He grabbed the work light and a heavy wrench and inched towards the back door, hearing someone thudding against the door. He held Toothless back, and then watched as the door burst open and three shapes entered. "See what you can grab," one said, and Hiccup frowned. It was Vorg, a guy who had left Berk High the previous year. By him were Oswald, Dager's older brother, and Sven, Dager's cousin. They'd been called the Berserkers at school, an even wilder and more dangerous gang than Dager's bad boy crew, and clearly hadn't really graduated to anything more productive. Pausing and hoping the element of surprise would work, Hiccup clicked on the work lamp and temporarily blinded the intruders. "Now, Toothless," the boy said, and swung at Vorg, who was first in, clouting him across the face with the heavy wrench. Toothless gave a huge growl and leapt onto Oswald, biting him really hard. Sven swung a punch as his friends screamed, but Hiccup ducked and swung the wrench like a baseball bat, catching Sven straight across the face with a satisfying thud. He went down like a skittle, groaning as Toothless turned to him. Hiccup kept the lamp fiercely in their faces as the mutt sank his teeth into Vorg's backside. He screamed as Hiccup clouted him with the wrench again. "Get out!" Hiccup shouted and threw the wrench at them, then grabbed more wrenches and began to pelt them. He threw in some oil and grease for good measure. Trying to shield themselves from the barrage and Toothless, who was biting anyone not Hiccup, the attackers hurled a mouthful of abuse, but retreated. Breathing hard, the boy slammed the door closed, jammed the bolts in place and wedged the lock shut using a thick crowbar. He slid to the floor, his back against the door. Tail wagging, eyes bright and tongue hanging out in happiness, the dog prowled back and forth, looking exceptionally pleased with himself. He gave a small yip. And Hiccup gave a smile. Yeah, you did everything." He grinned, scratching under the mutt's chin. Toothless gave such a relaxed growl it was almost a purr. "Hey, why would they do that? I mean, Gobber's shop literally looks like it's falling over." And then he sighed and realized, he'd managed to fight off the feared Berserkers, and then he realized that they probably wouldn't give up. There was a very real risk that they would come back another day, armed and ready for anything. But for tonight, he was able to sleep sound in the knowledge they wouldn't be back. But though he curled up around him again, he could see the outline of Toothless Sears and knew the mutt would keep watch until morning. Oh! He awoke to the sounds of hammering on the door and Gobber cursing very imaginatively. He flinched and groaned as all his bruises made themselves known full force. He lifted his head. "Es okay, Gobber," he shouted and scrambled to his feet, blinking and wincing. "I've got it." He unjammed the door and unbolted it. And let in a very angry Gobber. "What the hell are you doing here?" the mechanic growled. "And locking me out of my own workshop. I oughta tan your hide." He stomped in, not noticing the faintest look of hurt and betrayal in the wide green eyes before Hiccup slumped his shoulders and looked away. "Well, maybe I should have just let the men who broke in here steal all your tools and the cash box," he shot back sarcastically. Gobber turned in shock, his eyes seeing the wrenches scattered, grease all over the floor, the lamp lying by the crumpled oil-stained blanket and a very satisfied-looking Toothless. "Laddie," he murmured. "Yeah, middle of the night, 3 guys forced the door, but Toothless and I were waiting." He managed a small smile. He did most of the work. I just hit a couple of them with the big wrench, but I guess they may come back, and the lock is shot." Gobber stared around, seeing a mess but also that his most valuable assets were still there. And then his brain caught up and he realized the boy had been camping out in his shop. He gaped. "Laddie," he asked softly. "What are you doing here?" Hiccup stared into his face. He was actually taller than Gobber now, though still lanky and lean, but he bowed his head. Not really allowed at home," he murmured. "That was why I called." Gobber clasped his shoulders and sighed. "I'm so sorry, lad," he said genuinely, "but I'm sleeping on Silent Sven's couch." "Boy, can he talk?" "I have nie bed tie call me own, let alone offer tie ye." Hiccup nodded. "Es okay," he sighed. "I'll be fine here." "Ye canna stay here now, laddie," Gobber sighed. "Tease tie safe. And sleeping on the streets is?" Hiccup asked him sharply. "What was I thinking? Of course lying in a doorway or on a park bench is gonna be far safer than locked safely inside the forge. I'll have to get new doors and locks, and the shop is nae doing so good at present," Gobber admitted. Hiccup's eyes widened and the boy felt his stomach lurch. Surely Gobber wasn't saying what he thought he was saying. "Please, not now. And I will need to cut you hours, just temporarily." "Yup. Full house now." It was official. The gods totally hated him. "So you're throwing me out and sacking me," Hiccup said bitterly, grabbing his bag, Toothless' bowl, the remains of his food and the oily blanket. "Thanks, Hiccup. Good work in seeing of those thieves. Now hit the street." He shoved past the man, his eyes flashing with anger and betrayal, and made it all the way to the road before stopping and covering his face with his hands. "Can I at least leave my dog here until after school, or do you expect me to send him to the pound?" he shouted. "Laddie, I didn't mean to, but I really dinna have a choice," Gobber protested. "Of course, Toothless. Thanks." Hiccup snarled and walked away, boiling with anger, while utterly heartbroken that even the person he trusted the most seemed to have betrayed him. Chapter 31, The Wrong Sort of Friends. Chapter text. He hardly noticed the scolding for being late or the extra homework he was given for his sullen response to the teacher throughout the lesson. He was cold and hungry, he was aching for a shower, and he felt utterly alone. Finally, when lunchtime arrived, he headed determinedly to the canteen and filled his plate. He didn't care that he was getting looks from the other students or that he sat alone, because all he wanted was to eat. So he looked up with exasperation when someone sat by him, and then he scowled. "Not in the mood," he told Astrid, and shoveled another chunk of burger into his mouth. "You look a mess," she told him bluntly. "Thank you for pointing that out." "Where did you sleep?" she asked him directly. "What do you care? You're covered in bruises, your clothes are filthy, and you are eating like you've not eaten for a week." Astrid pressed on. "That you for summarizing that," he mumbled through a mouthful of fries. "Again, what's it to you?" She stared at him, her expression confused. "I thought." "Why, see, there you go, thinking," he snarled. "Look, Astrid, though I'm sure I should be flattered our great class president is benevolent enough to grace me with her wisdom, I don't need it. He was breathing hard, eyes glaring into her hurt face. Oh, she said, staring into his hostile face. I was just. It's none of your business, he snapped, shoveling the last of his food into his mouth. He chewed furiously and swallowed. Just leave me alone, Miss Perfect. Then he got up and stalked away, tossing his tray onto the trolley and slamming the doors open as he left. Astrid watched him leave with annoyance. She was worried because he had looked really bruised and she knew he must have slept rough. And because his previous words really rolled round in her head. No one cared. And she felt a lot of guilt because he had rescued her and she felt she had let him down, but she couldn't help him if he didn't want to let her. What are you doing? Cammy asked her pointedly. She sighed. I really don't know, she huffed. You know, we're wondering why you went to talk to him. Lila noted. Astrid frowned. Lila and her friends, Savannah and Rayleigh, were nominally friends, but Lila had hated the fact that Astrid was the undisputed queen of senior year. She never missed an opportunity to pick at her. He doesn't pay any attention to the teachers and he looks a mess, she explained, then stopped. She could give the real reason or just protect herself from risking her popularity. He's a disgrace to the year. I thought it was my job to try to talk to him. Weren't you worried? Savannah asked, eyes wide. He's such a troublemaker. No, I don't believe he really is. I think he just needs some friends and family who actually give a damn. But Astrid gave a fake smile and stood. Yep. One of the worst, she agreed easily. And he hangs with Dager's crew, Lila reminded her snidely. Yeah, they're a bad crowd. Rayleigh added. Instinctively, Astrid glanced at Heather, but the girl wasn't bothered. Dager was her brother, but she knew his faults. You should steer clear, asked. Lila giggled. Someone may mistake you for his friend. She flounced off. Bitch, Cammy noted. Yeah, you heard she's invited all the team to her party, Dager and his pals included. Ruff asked, arriving with a plate laden with crisps and candy. You're not gonna eat that? Astrid asked in horror. Watch me, sister. Ruff grinned. So, bitchy and hypocritical. Cammy noted. But we're not invited. Astrid checked. There was a pause. We all are. Heather said in an embarrassed voice. There was a moment where they realized Lila's obvious plan. Does she think we don't talk to each other? Ruff scowled. Yeah, but we're not going. Cammy told her pointedly. Imagine an evening of Lila acting like Queen Bee. Ruff made a barfing noise. Too much candy will do that to you. Heather pointed out with a wicked grin and threw a banana skin at her. Astrid grinned. Sleepover, she suggested. They all brightened up. My turn, Cammy offered. We'll get pizzas, fire up Netflix and just have fun. Far better than homework, or Lila. Heather grinned. You up for it? Asked. She blinked, annoyed about Lila, then relieved that she had good friends. She smiled. I'll bring chips and dips, she smiled. It'll be fun, just the girls. Ruff shared a look with Cammy. Yeah, just girls, she muttered. Oh. Hiccup scrubbed his face in the bathroom, staring into the mirror at the reflection. He felt a pang of guilt for yelling at Astrid, but he really didn't need her pity. About the last thing he had left was his reputation, and it was stupid and sort of crazy, but as he had nowhere to stay and had shouted at his only real friend, it was all he had left. He turned to the door to face Dager and he stiffened but didn't back off. Hiccup. Dager's eyes were madly wide. He clapped the boy across the shoulder and Hiccup staggered. What the hell are you doing here? He gaped. Dager grinned and spread his arms. They can't keep me away, and the old man knows Alvin. Put in a good word for me. Hiccup rolled his eyes and felt sick, shocked again by Alvin's hypocrisy. Figures, he grumbled, then glared at the larger boy. What do you want? He asked sharply. Dager gave a mock-hurt look. Hiccup, Hiccup, there's no need for that. Dager protested lightly. You did wrong and we dealt with you. You've taken your licks like a good boy and we're all friends again. It's done, provided you remember who your real friends are. He wrapped his arm around Hiccup's shoulder and grinned. Nodding, Hiccup allowed himself to be steered into the hole because it was far easier than resisting. The others were waiting and he stiffened, but they just nodded to him. He swallowed. Being beaten up hadn't really been much fun and he still hurt, but he would rather be friends with the crew than on his own. Especially since he had done a great job in chasing off everyone else who had reached out for him. "Hey guys," he murmured. Only Dog's Breath scowled and Thuggery winked at him. "Right, now Hiccup is back," Dago announced. "I think we need him to prove he's still one of us." Instantly wary, the boy looked at the group. "What do you want, Dago?" he asked shortly. "You should be grateful you're being given another chance." Savage scoffed. "Yeah, I'm just trembling with excitement," Hiccup shot back sarcastically. "Still a sarky little shit, isn't he?" Thuggery commented. "But this should be right up your street," Dago said seductively. Hiccup folded his arms and hitched up an eyebrow. "The catch?" he demanded. "My brother got into some trouble last night," Dago explained as Hiccup froze. He swung his wary green gaze to see Dago's face was cold and ruthless. He was out looking for a bit of cash, but someone attacked him, with some scrawny mutt. They were chased off and bitten by the damned dog. And my brother is really pissed. So I said we'd go back there tonight, break into the place, finish off the mutt and burn it to the ground. Chapter 32, Cornered. Chapter text. His brain congealed into a mess of shock and horror as he listened to Dago's words. Dago wanted to go back to the forge, break in, kill Toothless and burn the place to the ground. And Dago didn't know he was the guy who'd fought off his brother and the Berserkers. He was literally a dead man if Dago found out. But he couldn't let the forge be burnt down. No matter how angry he was at Gobber, because Gobber had always been there for him when no one else had been. Gobber had taken over the father role when his dad had gone, and Hiccup loved Gobber as a second father. Burning down the forge would ruin Gobber, break him. And he had to make sure Toothless was safe. Toothless trusted him, waited for him, protected him, and he couldn't let them hurt him. Honestly, Hiccup wasn't sure he would do if the dog was hurt. "Megard to Hiccup." Dago growled and the auburn-haired boy blinked. "What?" he asked shortly. "You in?" Dago insisted. Hiccup frowned. "Sorry, you want to go back to a place that your brother and his friends were driven away from last night to rob them, kill their dog and burn the place down," he repeated. "Where do I start? Won't they have ramped up security and maybe be watching? Alarms, cameras, reinforced doors. You scared?" Savage scoffed. "Well, not keen to ending up talking to the cops when this all crashes and burns," Hiccup retorted. "But that's the idea." Thuggery chuckled. "Especially the burning part. And we know you're handy with locks and other bits of tinkering. You can get us in, can't you? And I mean, why kill the dog?" Hiccup asked. "My dog. It bit my brother." Dago snarled. "Hey, you break into a place with a dog," Hiccup said sarcastically, and Dago grabbed the front of his grimy hoodie, almost hauling him off his feet. "Are you going soft on me?" he menaced. "Worried about some freaking dog?" "I like dogs," Hiccup admitted with a grimace. "Better than you. Far better. Have you forgotten what we talked about yesterday?" Dago breathed, leaning close. No. "You're with us or against us," Dago reminded him brutally. "So what is it?" "W with you," Hiccup admitted, ashamed. But there was no one else remotely on his side. Dago shoved him back a few steps. "So tonight, meet in the park at 8. Dago said. "We'll join up with Ozzy and his gang and then go to finish off the garage." "Garage?" Hiccup muttered, still readjusting his hoodie. "Come on, Dag, there won't be anything there. Haven't we just covered this?" Dago asked him pointedly. Hiccup sighed. "At least wait a few days," he suggested, but Dago slammed him back against the wall, fists full of his hoodie and pressing the skinny shape into the wall. The larger boy leaned very close. "If I hear one more sound, I'm gonna forget you're my friend and kick the crap out of you. Are we clear?" Hiccup stared wide-eyed at him, scarcely daring to breathe. "Understand." Dager shouted in his face. Answer the freaking question. You said you didn't want to hear another sound, Hiccup murmured, seeing Dager turn bright red in anger. Dager's face lurched closer. Yeah, understood, he added quickly, and Dager pushed away, turning along the hall as the bell sounded. Don't be late, Hiccup, Dager sneered. Because I will find you if you let me down. Hiccup watched as the crew walked away and he tried to calm his breathing. He was trembling, which made him feel worse. He was tough. He could handle this. But he couldn't let them kill his dog or destroy his friend's garage. He ducked back into the bathroom and fished out his phone. Without hesitating, because he knew if he thought about this, he would stop himself, he phoned Gobber. After 2 rings, the mechanic picked up. What is it, laddie? The voice came. Gobber still sounded sore and Hiccup took a breath. Gobber, I'm sorry, he said quietly. I just don't have anything right now, but you gotta listen. This guys who broke in, they are coming back tonight. Laddie. What are ye saying? Hiccup cringed inwardly. Gobber, I know them, he said ashamedly. They're my friends. They are going to break in and then burn the place down. Just, do something. Call the cops. Get out everything important. Please. Hiccup, what are ye saying? Gobber repeated directly. I'll be with them. Hiccup hissed. They want to kill Toothless as well. And I can't get out of this. We're meeting in the park at 8 and then we're heading over. I never thought this of ye, laddie, Gobber said in a hard voice. It's not my idea. Hiccup protested. But you're going along with it. Gobber accused him. Not like I have a choice, Hiccup shot back, his temper flaring. No friends, no food, no home. At least you have a roof over your head and a full belly. I have been thrown out of my home, Gobber. Al may let me back at the end of the week, but I doubt it. But I'm warning you about what they plan, because you're like a second dad, but if you think I would do this to you. He hung up, blinking hard and shoving his phone deep in his pocket. His eyes were burning with anger and misery and he turned to the hall. It was art, he was late and honestly, he no longer cared. He walked in late without a word of apology, head down and face locked in a skull. Miss Sylvester watched him silently and then walked to his side. Anything you wish to say, Mr. Haddock, she prompted him pointedly. He glanced up and she was shocked, seeing the bruises on his skin and the hurt in his eyes. Something had happened to him, something catastrophic. He sighed. Sorry, he mumbled, and she nodded, leaning close. Are you all right? She asked him softly. He stared at his lap, hands twisting together. I'll be fine, he said, not answering and giving the answer all at once. She patted him gently on the shoulder. I'm sure you will, she said, explaining the lesson. Slowly, he fished a pencil, twirled it in his left hand before starting to sketch, but after a few minutes, he stopped and stared at the page, before tearing it in half. He made to get up, but a gentle hand caught his and he stiffened. Astrid stared up at him, seeing him shocked. It's okay, she said gently, beckoning him to sit down and scooting her chair closer. Hiccup, if you don't feel like working, just look like you're helping me. You don't have to, but then Miss Sylvester will think you're doing your tutoring thing. He stared at her, shocked, and finally nodded silently, angling his chair to look at her work and watch her drawing. It was what he had planned for the lesson before everything else had happened. He watched her silently for about 10 minutes as his mind slowly cleared, and then he leaned forward. Your perspective is all wrong, he murmured softly, grabbing his pad and swiftly drawing the area she had gotten wrong to demonstrate. He swiftly explained the principle again and she frowned, then nodded, finally understanding. I'm sorry, she said, and she didn't mean about her poor drawing skills. His green gaze flicked up to meet hers and he shrugged. I probably should apologize. He mumbled, rubbing the back of his neck in embarrassment. I was just angry. She nodded. I guessed, she smiled gently, erasing a line and redrawing it again with a frown, chewing her bottom lip as she concentrated. It was a surprisingly cute expression and Hiccup pulled himself up. Where had that come from? And I owe you a lesson. He added. She paused and looked up at him. Anytime this week, she smiled. You've got my number. He nodded. You know you can call me if you need anything. His eyebrows shot up. Astrid, you really don't know what you're saying, he sighed. She gave a small smile. Call me if you need anything, she repeated as the bell rang. He stood up, then nodded. Thanks, he said softly and headed out, but the smile fell from his face as he hit the hall. He was heading for detention, but after that, he was on his own. He had to work out some way to get Toothless away and stop Dagur destroying the forge. And time was running out. Chapter 33, Accomplice. Chapter text. As soon as he was released from detention, he headed into town as swiftly as he could, not stopping or looking for Dagur and his crew. He knew they would be in a diner, stocking up before the evening's fun, but he was more concerned about his friend. Not looking at the front of the garage, he slid in the back and was welcomed by the excited barking of the mutt. The black dog bounced up and down, bright green eyes locked on his master and a slippery tongue lapped his bruised face. Hey, buddy, he grinned, his eyes sparkling with relief as he embraced the dog and fussed him happily. Yeah, glad to see you too, now come on, I don't think we're welcome here anymore. He heard the door open, but he steadfastly faced in the other direction, walking wordlessly to the gate. A huge part of him wished that Gobber would just say something, would make him feel as if he wasn't unwanted, but the big man silently watched him open the gate. Hiccup stole a small look back, his wide green eyes offering a silent plea, but Gobber was scowling and Hiccup turned away swiftly, grabbing Toothless' collar and leading him out. Just you and me, he sighed. He hung around the mall until most of the shops closed and then checked his phone. It was getting close to the time he needed to meet with Dagur, and honestly, if he failed to turn up, the guys would make his life a living hell at school. But he couldn't risk his friend. So, in desperation, he got to the edge of the park and made Toothless sit by the fountain. Stay here, bud, he murmured. And keep out of sight. The dog wagged his tail and Hiccup wondered if he understood anything. He stayed, but he really truly hoped that the dog would stay back. At least it was dark and getting cold, so Toothless would be more anonymous in the gloom. He steeled himself and headed for the playground, finding the guys lounging on the swings like usual. I had almost given you up, Dagur said in a cold voice, and Hiccup gave a wordless shrug. Ozzy was a bulkier and angrier version of Dagur, his remote pale green eyes narrowing as he caught sight of the boy. He grabbed his arm cruelly and shook Hiccup. Never could see why you let this twig hang out with you, he growled. Dagur gave a wide grin. Well, he's smart, sarcastic and good at locks and mechanisms, he replied. He just has to learn to keep his mouth shut. Ozzy leaned closer to Hiccup. You know what happens to people who cross me, he asked. Hiccup's eyes widened. Stiff talking to. Removal from your Christmas card list, he suggested, but stiffened as Ozzy flicked his knife open. Guess again, he said in a growl, lightly digging the blade into the skin just below Hiccup's lower lip, making a small nick. I understand. He breathed. Ozzy chuckled and shoved him away. Let's move out, he shouted. The sooner this is done, the sooner we can have some fun. Hiccup desperately glanced at the others, but all of them to a man seemed eager to go and destroy someone's livelihood for no good reason. And it was probably his fault. Because if he hadn't been there, they would have taken the cash box and really nothing else. Now, because he pissed them off, they would take everything. He gave a low whistle and hoped he heard a quiet panting in the gloom. He was trailing along last, so he was able to pick out the green spots in the night, the eerie reflection of a pair of bright green eyes, faithfully following their master. The forge was locked tight when they arrived, shutters down and door to the yard chained closed. The gangs clambered over and Hiccup was boosted over early in the process to stop him escaping. So he landed awkwardly and waiting until Dagur and Ozzy Frog marched him to the door and gestured. Open it, they commanded. Hiccup peered at the door. It was brand new and reinforced with heavy hinges and a brand new lock. At least Gobber had taken him seriously, for all the good it had done. The gang wouldn't take no for an answer, and Hiccup guessed he would probably still be able to break in. With a sigh, he fished out his screwdriver and deftly unfastened the lock, dismantling it in a matter of minutes. Get a move on, Fishbone. Ozzy growled and Hiccup shivered. He was honestly moving as quickly as he could because he was hoping Gobber had planned something. But he knew the door wouldn't be bolted because it was the only way out at the end of the day. With an inward cringe, the lock gave. He was shoved aside as Ozzy and Dager surged forward, crowbars and baseball bats in hand. Backing away as swiftly as he could, he whistled through his teeth. He heard the approach of paws and the huff of breath as a dog leapt, and then Toothless arrived with a bark and a very menacing growl. "Look out!" Hiccup shouted and made to intercept the dog as everyone turned. Ozzy was already lurching forward with his baseball bat raised to hit the black hound. And as Dager turned round to snarl at him, Gobber and a handful of cops erupted from the garage. Instantly there was chaos as every man ran for it, trying to evade the angry police. Ozzy and Dager went for the wall and Vorg kicked out at Toothless, who cheerfully bit the man hard. The rest of the crew were scrambling for it as Hiccup stared at the wall, knowing he stood no chance of getting over, and the hand tightened on his arm. "Gotcha!" Hiccup struggled hard, watching his friends all escape, except Savage, who was also dragged back from where he was clambering over the wall. He met the larger boy's eyes and read the warning. "Get off me," he shouted. The policeman jerked him closer and stared into his eyes. "You're coming down the station, boy," he sneered. "I haven't done anything." Hiccup protested. "Except breaking and entering." "Hey, I never went in and neither did he." Hiccup protested. "I just opened the door and then the others went in." He saw Gobber scowl and wished with all his heart that he hadn't lost his temper, but seeing the one person he had relied on looking at him so coldly made his heart sink to his boots. "He's a bad UN," the mechanic growled. Hiccup cast him a final desperate look before being taken away. The drive to the police station was silent, Savage sitting grimly at his side, his accusing presence reminding Hiccup of the betrayal they had believed he committed. Not that he would dare turn them in anyway, Ozzy had really scared him. Dager was vicious and unpredictable, but Ozzy. His hand rose to the small cut he had made and stared at his lap. He guessed the man wouldn't hesitate to hurt him if he suspected Hiccup had betrayed him. Once they arrived, the boys were separated and interrogated separately. Hiccup faced the same cop who had grabbed him, a huge burly man with fair hair and a thick beard in true Burke tradition. A small pang hit him then. His dad had been ridiculously proud of his enormous flaming red beard, carefully tended and braided. He sighed and the cop leaned forward. "Am I boring you?" he growled. A little," the boy replied, sitting back. "You know you can go to prison for breaking and entering." "Didn't go in." Hiccup repeated. "Tell someone who cares," the cop snapped. "We'll have you in juvie before you can say Burke." "Hate to tell you, but that would be physically impossible," Hiccup pointed out. "I mean, it takes like 1 second to say Burke and it would take longer than that to walk out of this room and—" "Shut up," the cop roared. "Just give me the names of your accomplices." "I thought you wanted me to shut up," the boy asked. "Your accomplices," the man snarled, rising to his feet. Hiccup stared into his red face. "Hey. I was the accomplice," he protested. "And you're taking the rap," the cop told him menacingly. "I'll replace the lock." Hiccup offered. "You'll tell me the names," the man shouted, curling his fist. "Aren't there laws against that kind of thing?" he said quickly. The cop leaned closer. "Number 1. Cares," he menaced and grabbed a handful of hoodie. Hiccup stiffened and his breathing quickened. The cop was right, no one did. "I care," he pointed out as the cop leaned closer. "The names," he shouted, dragging the boy from his seat. "I really don't know their names," Hiccup lied quickly. "Just met them in the park and they—" The cop pulled his arm back and then he gave a nasty smile. "Let's see what your friend says when he finds out you rolled on them," he threatened. "Not this again." Hiccup groaned. "No one will believe you, by the way, 'cause you still won't know their names." "Why, you little—" The cop snarled and raised his fist again. And then the door opened and a tough-faced female officer stuck her head in. "Easy, Hawk," she said dryly. "The boy's father has come to collect him." Hiccup stiffened as the officer lumbered to his feet and grabbed his arm. "You just got lucky," he growled. "Doubt it," Hiccup commented, "since my dad died 5 years ago." But he was still dragged out into the main reception area, to face the furious shape of Alvin. Chapter 34, She Turned Away. Chapter text. Hiccup stared at the shape for a total of 3 seconds and turned to Officer Hawk. "I'll stay here, if it's all the same to you," he said quickly. It's not Officer Hawk said nastily. Don't wanna answer to Daddy. He's not my dad. Hiccup insisted. My dad is dead. That's the man who married my mom. He's no relation of mine. He folded his arms and scowled. Alvin had thrown him out. He would be damned if he got in a car with the man, and ended up on the streets again. Or worse. I'd rather stay here. This isn't a motel. Hawk growled, but the female officer stared at him. Your mother is still alive, she asked, and he nodded. We will need to speak with her, because she is your legal guardian, isn't she? She asked firmly. Hiccup took a sighing breath and nodded. Okay, yeah, he sighed. But I'd rather you didn't bother her. We'll take you home ourselves and speak to her about what happened this evening, the female officer told him. My name is Officer Justine Hansen. Come on, Hiccup. We'll drive you home in the squad car. Oh joy, he muttered as he was walked past Alvin, not meeting the man's eye but knowing there was no way out of this easily. Somehow, he had managed to get himself taken home and admitted because the police would be with him and Alvin wouldn't dare show himself in a bad light to the authorities. As God forbid that anyone see through his hypocritical mask of caring headmaster and kindly family man. The journey back wasn't as long as Hiccup hoped, and his stomach was dancing with apprehension. He was slumped in the back, wishing he could just make a break for it and wondering where Toothless was. The dog had run off when the cops arrived and he had no clue where his friend was. His bag was clutched to his middle, the phone slipped back into his pocket and silent. There was no one who would phone him and check he was okay, certainly not the people who got him into this in the first place. He closed his eyes and wished that he had been with his dad when that plane went down. Sometimes, life really seemed a never-ending punishment and he really missed having someone who actually cared. He almost flinched as they pulled up outside the house, seeing Alvin clambering out of his neat car and opening the door to let them in. He did flinch as he saw his mother's eyes widen when he got out of the cop car and he offered her a wan smile. Hi, Mom, he said sheepishly. She stared at him, almost moving towards him to hug her only child, but Alvin's hand gently touched hers and she paused, then drew back from him, her eyes dropping to the floor. And he felt as if he had been kicked in the stomach at that, desperately wanting some acknowledgement from the one person he loved. She stood back as Alvin gestured for the cops to escort him into the sitting room. Head down, shoulders hunched, he walked past and sat on the couch, hands stuffed into pockets and eyes fixed to the floor. The cops sat by him as his mom and Alvin took the couch opposite, the big man holding his wife's hand solicitously. What's he been up to now? He asked gruffly. Officer Hansen sighed. Your son Hiccup was caught helping a gang break into a local garage, she explained. He was only one of 2 caught but most got away. He refused to give us the names of his accomplices. Is he going to court? Valka asked in a shaky voice. Is my son going to jail? Hawk scowled. If it was up to me, yes, he said bluntly. He's a smart mouth and a stubborn streak a mile wide, but he's got a clean record and the owner didn't press charges because nothing was stolen. He's a wild one, I'm afraid, Alvin said in such a sickly voice that Hiccup wanted to barf. He ran away and never came home yesterday. Look, he's been fightin' as well. We try to give him a good home but all he does is throw it back in our faces. He looks like a lad in need to a firm hand, Hawk suggested. Alvin gave a slow nod. Maybe you're right, he said thoughtfully. We try to be as understanding as we can cause the boy has never got over the loss of his father, but perhaps it's time for a firmer line. Hiccup cast the officer a despairing glance. Hawk had practically given Alvin permission. Anyway, we'll leave you to deal with him now, Officer Hansen said, getting up. We'll see ourselves out. Alvin rose and shook their hands respectfully. Thank you for bringing him home, he said calmly. You can't know how much relief that gives us. Hiccup watched them leave, heard the door slam, and Alvin slam the bolts home. He was hyperventilating as the big man walked heavily into the room. Go upstairs, he said to Valka, and she automatically rose, eyes on the floor as she headed out of the room, but she paused for a second to look back at her son. Oh, Hiccup, how could you? She asked softly. Your father would be so ashamed. And that broke him, his green eyes flashing with desperate anger at Alvin, at her, at Gobber and at his father for dying and leaving him here. No, he wouldn't because he's dead, he shouted. He's dead and I'm stuck here. I'm here with no one on my side and no one to care. Valka's eyes shone with hurt. Hiccup. How can you say that, she said sorrowfully. I do care. We both care. Hiccup marched forward, shoving his sleeve up. If Al cares so much, how come Al uses me to put out his cigars? He snapped, showing the circular burns on the soft inside of his forearm. How come he banned me from the house? How come I had to sleep rough? I won't hear these lies, she said and turned away from him, fleeing up the stairs. Mom, he shouted after her, but Alvin was barring the way. He tried to back up but a huge hand closed on his arm and dragged him to the back door into the yard. Breathing hard, struggling, he was shoved out as Alvin slammed the door behind them. Hiccup backed away. They'll find out, he said breathlessly. Who? The teachers, he said. They all know you're a bad UN, Hiccup. You'll turn up covered in bruises and they'll think is your VE been fightin' again. The cops. Same thing. And who'll they believe? What about Mom? Won't she ask where I am? He asked desperately. Your VE broken hurt, Hiccup, Alvin told him cruelly. She don't care. And then he hit the boy. Going down, Hiccup crawled away, feeling a kick impact his side. He tried scrambling back, casting a despairing look upstairs, and seeing a silhouette at the window. As he watched, she pulled the curtain and turned away. Then Alvin grabbed his hair and the slap across his face had him seeing stars. When he fell, his phone sighted away and Alvin saw it with a growl. And what's that? Hiccup grabbed for it as a heavy foot slammed down into the device. He yelled in pain and snatched his hand back, wincing in pain. He barely felt the next few kicks, until he was grabbed by the back of the hoodie and thrown against the back door. He hit with a slam and slid to the floor. Alvin loomed over him, opening the door and shoving the boy onto the rough jogging path behind the house. Get out, he growled. If you're not gone in 5 minutes, I'm setting Screamer on your... And he slammed the gate behind him. And it was only when the door to the house slammed that Hiccup untensed, his breaths hitching in utter misery. He had clung the idea that his mother was in the dark, that she would welcome him home and hug him and make him welcome. He could withstand whatever Alvin did if he knew she cared, but she had turned away. She had turned away. Feeling as if the heart had been completely torn out of his chest, he slowly scrambled to his feet. His legs were shaky and his breath was coming in clouds as frost was already forming on the edges of the leaves and the remaining grass. Stumbling, he began to walk back towards town, when a faint barking alerted him and he felt the anxiety in his chest ease just a fraction as the scruffy shape of Toothless bounded up, panting and bouncing in happiness. Trying to quieten down the mutt, he finally resumed his trudge back to the park, looking for somewhere to stay, but every possible place already had someone there, chasing away the skinny boy and his dog. He was shivering now, his stomach growling with hunger and head spinning with weariness and utter exhaustion. There was only one thing left to try, if Alvin hadn't taken that as well. He slowly drew his swollen and bruised hand from his pocket and winced as he turned over the phone. The screen was cracked but he could still switch it on and scroll down the list of contacts, not that he had many, until he reached his last hope. Miss Perfect. For a long moment his thumb hovered over the name, and then he made the call. It rang 3 times before she picked up and he listened to her clear, confident voice. Astrid. Hi, Astrid, it's Hiccup. He began, his voice thick and hoarse. He coughed. I know, Hiccup. Your name came up. He coughed again. The cold was really hurting his chest. Sorry, not really used to all this, he said sarcastically. Look, sorry, but I. He swallowed and closed his eyes. Astrid, I really need your help. Chapter 35, I need a favor. Chapter text. Astrid had completed her homework and was reading through the English text the class were studying when her phone rang. She lifted it, her eyebrows flying up as she saw the name, Hiccup. She answered the phone on the 3rd ring, frowning slightly. Astrid. Her voice sounded brisk and a little unfriendly even to herself. Hi, Astrid, it's Hiccup. He began, his voice thick and hoarse. She frowned as she heard a cough. She peered at her phone, it was after 10 at night. She sighed. I know, Hiccup. Your name came up. There was a pause and he coughed again. It sounded genuine, not a put-on cough, and there was another pause. Sorry, not really used to all this, he said sarcastically, and Astrid rolled her eyes. Look, sorry, but I. He sounded desperate, his voice thick and embarrassed as well. Astrid, I really need your help. She sat up, suddenly on alert. She knew she had asked him to call if he needed anything, but this was just weird. And she suddenly felt anxious. They weren't even really friends, were they? What was he asking her to do? What is it, she asked, trying not to sound wary because he had helped her more than once. And, to be honest, he had really saved her ass from being in major trouble with her parents. There was another pause. I. His voice faded. I need somewhere to stay. The words came all in a rush. Astrid paused and frowned. What? Are you kidding? She asked. There was a stiff silence, broken by another smothered cough. I wish, he said roughly. Can you help, or should I just go freeze to death? His words hit her then. She knew he had endured a beating on Monday, yet he had come in this morning disheveled and in the same dirty clothes. Could he be in trouble at home? Had they thrown him out for fighting? Why was she bothered? Astrid. The voice was hoarse. Sorry, you still there? I'm thinking, she said shortly. What could she do? Don't you have anywhere to go? Would I be calling you if I did? He asked sharply. Okay, I understand, forget it. No, she said before he could hang up. He did sound rough. It was late and she knew his friends weren't. You know where I live? He coughed softly. Remind me, he asked softly. 17, West Valhalla, she told him, and there was a pause. Nice address, he managed before coughing again. Come over, she said slowly. I'll sort something out. There was a pause. Really? Thanks, Astrid. He coughed again. I mean it. Thanks. See ya soon, she said, feeling a sudden sense of responsibility as she hung up. How would she get her parents to let him stay? They were tough enough to persuade to let Heather, Cammy and Ruff stay, and they had been her friends forever. This was a boy, for want of a better word. And he wasn't even her friend. But she knew more about him than most of the school, and he had called her, probably because she was the last resort. Just as he had been when she had been at the party. She got up and tossed her phone onto the bed, then went downstairs, smiling as she saw her mom, finishing a cup of coffee and checking the washing. Ingrid smiled at her and she sat at the table with a glass of water. Mom, I need a favor, she said without preamble. Her mom frowned. What is it? She asked and sat by her daughter. There was a pause. Mom, one of my friends is in trouble, she said. He's been thrown out of his home. He? Ingrid frowned. Yeah, she said in a wary voice. Look, he's kind of accident prone and he gets bullied. He's the boy helping me with my art. Astrid, what are you asking? Ingrid said softly, staring at her daughter. Astrid stared at the table for a long moment. Can he stay with us? She asked. Ingrid frowned. Of course he can't, her mother said briskly. You know your father will never permit a strange boy to stay, and... Astrid shook her head rapidly, rolling her eyes at their assumptions. I mean, this was hiccup. Oh Mom, she huffed. Honestly. This is not my boyfriend. I don't have a boyfriend. I'm not about to dump my grades and suddenly have sex with him. Her cheeks were scarlet with embarrassment. Astrid, you are only 17 and we only want what is best for you, Ingrid told her reasonably. Mom, my friend has been thrown out of his home and is looking at sleeping on the streets, she argued. He's 17 too. How can I look him in the eye if I let him down? How can I look myself in the mirror if I have to turn him away? You've told him to come here, her mother said in shock. Astrid nodded. Mom, please. I have a straighter average and have for the whole of high school. Hiccup has nowhere else to go, and he isn't a bad guy. If it was me in trouble, wouldn't you want to hope that someone would look out for me? Like he already did. That's a pointless argument, Astrid, because you are far more careful than this boy has been. I don't think he had any choice, Mom, she said quietly. He sounded desperate. Astrid, it's late, Ingrid sighed. Can't he just ask for emergency accommodation? Astrid's appalled look made her stiffen. Look, Astrid, we aren't a charity. No, but you always talk about being a well-rounded person and having a well-rounded portfolio, Astrid said bitterly. But clearly it's all for looks. Because it doesn't mean being a decent person. And letting a friend sleep on the streets in the freezing temperatures isn't decent, and it isn't right, Mom. It makes you and me a hypocrite and completely heartless. She got to her feet. I don't know what I can say to him. She paused and she glared at her mother, her laser blue glare locking with her mom's. Guess what, I won't. You can tell him to go away. Her voice was thick with tears and she turned away, but Ingrid grasped her arm and swung Astrid to face her. This means that much to you? Her mother asked, and Astrid nodded urgently. Her eyes pleaded for her mother to understand, then Ingrid nodded. I'll make up the spare room. But if he causes any trouble, he's out. He's your responsibility, Astrid. She flung herself against her mom and gave her a hug. Thanks, Mom, she said with relief. I promise he won't cause any trouble. And then the doorbell rang. Chapter 36, Hope. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Ingrid opened the door with Astrid at her side to see a tall, skinny shape standing in the cold. The boy almost started at seeing the woman, and his wide emerald gaze looked wary as he automatically backed up a pace. He stared, then ran his hand through his disheveled auburn hair, pushing the hood off with the same movement. His hoodie was grimy and stained, his baggy jeans had mud on the knees, and he had no coat. There was a school bag on his shoulder, and a skinny black dog was sitting at his side, panting and almost smiling. You didn't say anything about a dog, Ingrid told her daughter, and Astrid rolled her eyes, glaring at Hiccup. He didn't say anything about a dog, Mom, she protested. He'll be no trouble, Mrs. Horferson, he said, his teeth chattering. If he could maybe just stay in the yard, he'll be fine. The woman stared at him and he swallowed. Then his shoulders sagged, reading her stony expression and making the conclusion he was on his own. I understand. He muttered. Thank you anyway. He turned to the dog. Come on, bud, we gotta go. The green eyes looked up trustingly and the dog whined as the boy began coughing again, almost doubling up. Astrid looked at him worriedly. That sounded even worse than over the phone. Wait, Hiccup, isn't it? Ingrid said as he turned back to the road. He nodded. Hiccup Haddock, he said roughly, offering her a hand. She shook it, his skin was freezing. Ingrid swept her keen gaze over him again, seeing him shivering, feeling the icy skin and noting the bruises on his face, including a new and still livid welt in the shape of a hand. We need to get you out of the cold, she decided, hearing his teeth chattering. He blinked, surprised, then turned back to Toothless. About Toothless, he asked, coughing again. He's my best friend, I can't leave him. Ingrid paused, then nodded to Astrid. Can you open the side door, please, Astrid, she asked as the girl raced away out back. Hiccup led the dog round in the direction she pointed and tried not to feel anxious as the front door slammed shut, but after a few moments, the gate creaked open and Astrid peeked through, smiling shyly as the boy warily walked in, though Toothless was happily trotting into the yard, his tail wagging wildly. Astrid closed and bolted the door and then turned to the dog. He's so cute, she said, leaning forward and rubbing him behind the ears. The dog's green eyes rolled back appreciatively and his tail wagged wildly. He gave a little moan of pleasure. Traitor, Hiccup grumbled. She glanced up, amused at his words as he coughed again. Why Toothless, she asked, straightening up and walking back towards the house. There was a kennel there with a full bowl of water and an empty food bowl. Hiccup shrugged. He's lost a few teeth, he admitted, crouching down and rubbing the dog behind the ears affectionately. He's a stray, kinda like me. If you have a rag or something he could lie on. She shook her head, not sure they had anything. He sighed. Sorry, but he sighed, then fished in his school bag and hauled out a plain bowl, pouring in a small helping of biscuits from an almost empty bag. Sorry, it's not more, but he sighed. I'll have to get some more tomorrow. Toothless fell on the bowl, scraping away at top speed, his tail wagging wildly. and then a fine golden dog emerged from the kennel. It was obvious the owner of the kennel was Pedigree, a fine hound with shining coat and feathered tail. She had amber eyes and inspected Toothless thoughtfully. The stray flattened his ears and backed away. "He's just a softie," Hiccup explained, stuffing his hands under his folded arms. "Stormfly, be a good girl," Astrid suggested. "Stormfly?" he asked incredulously. "Are you kidding me?" She gave him an irritated look as she rubbed the dog's head. "She's Pedigree," she explained. "Her full name is Beatrice Royal Stormfly III, Stormfly for short. I got her when I started high school." Hiccup pointed to the beautiful dog. "Toothless, meet Stormfly." "Stormfly, this is Toothless. He hasn't got a pedigree and I have no clue how old he is, he's just a scrawny mutt like his owner." "Toothless, try not to embarrass me, okay bud?" Toothless gave his wide smile, his tongue hanging out as he panted happily, then proceeded to try to smell Stormfly's rear end. Hiccup groaned, watching Stormfly trying to turn round to get away from the determined black nose. "And there goes that." He sighed. Astrid began to giggle at his chagrin, watching the boy talking to the dog and gently scratching the pedigree dog under the chin. Both dogs were wagging away and responding happily to him. "You know, you're pretty good with them," she smirked. He shrugged and it deteriorated into a coughing fit. "Hiccup, are you okay?" His eyes flicked up and he opened his mouth to deny any problem, but then he paused, and shook his head. "No," he admitted quietly. "I'm not." Toothless pulled away and the two dogs both went into the kennel as Astrid walked back to the house. "You coming?" she asked and he nodded, walking stiffly after her. They reached the kitchen and he kicked off his shoes as he entered, meeting Ingrid's smiling eyes. "Have you eaten?" she asked and he shook his head slightly. No, but you don't have to bother," he murmured, but Ingrid was already at the fridge, assembling him a sandwich and a mug of cocoa. Coughing gently, he sat down and stared up at them. His eyes kept flicking to the sandwich as Ingrid nodded, and finally he reached out and took a huge bite, closing his eyes and sighing in relief. Astrid stared at him in shock, seeing him tearing through the food like a starving man. Ingrid touched her shoulder. "I'll get the room ready," she murmured. "Bring him up when he's finished." Hiccup paused, looking up and coughing again as Astrid sat opposite him. He took another bite of the sandwich. I can't believe you're doing this," he mumbled, his mouth full. She sighed. "Me neither," she admitted, and he quirked an eyebrow. "Then why?" he asked her directly, his eyes very bright. She stared at him. "You're a human being and you need a break," she said. He lifted his left hand, horribly bruised and swollen. "I think I already got one here," he sighed, grimacing. Her eyes popped wide and she gently grasped it, her eyes seeing the mark of a heel on the pale skin. "Oh my God," she gasped. "That looks painful. How did that happen?" I accidentally put my hand under a foot that was trying to smash my phone," he explained dryly, carefully pulling his hand away. His skin was still cold, though his eyes looked brighter. She smiled and rose, heading towards the stairs. "Simon, I think Mom will have a bed ready for you," she murmured. "Do have anything to change into?" He stilled. Literally only got what I stand in," he admitted ashamedly. She paused. "Hiccup, it's okay," she told him calmly, but his green eyes flicked up and for a moment, they were fired with anger. "No, it's not," he told her tightly, and then sagged. "But it's all I got." Silently, he followed her up to the second floor and along to a neat room with a bed turned back and a lamp on the bedside table. A towel was folded on the bed and he stared at Astrid in shock. His bag hit the floor and he stared, turning back to look at her. "Why?" he mouthed in shock. She walked forward and caught his arms, feeling him trembling. "Because you need the help," she told him, seeing him blink. "You saved me, Hiccup. You're safe here." His breath hitched and he turned away. He shook his head. I. He murmured and coughed again. Astrid smiled. "Get some rest," she told him. "If you want, put your clothes outside the door and I'll put them in the washing machine." Thank you," he murmured hoarsely, coughing again. He paused and then blushed. "Astrid, could you maybe leave? I need to get undressed." Astrid's eyes widened. She had been staring at Hiccup, with his bright green eyes and tousled auburn hair and unexpectedly cute blush, his sharp jaw darkened by bruising and expression very wary. "Oh, of course." She mumbled and left, pulling the door closed behind her and leaning against it. What was that? It was Hiccup, for Thor's sake. Sarcastic, trouble-making Hiccup. Hiccup who had raced in and saved her from being raped. Hiccup who had gotten her from that fight without being seen. Hiccup who had been beaten up by his so-called friends and was now homeless and desperate. She heard a soft groan that deteriorated into a cough and paused. He was very bruised and probably sick. But she heard a creak and the door opened a crack. Hiccup leaned out and placed a bundle of clothes out the door, but he started as he saw Astrid. She smiled gently. "Sleep well." He gave a small smile and pulled the door closed. After the filthy clothes were in the washing machine, Astrid walked upstairs, going to the bathroom, washing her face and cleaning her teeth, before brushing out and loosely rebraiding her hair. She was heading back to her room when she stopped and paused at Hiccup's door, gently pushing it ajar and peering at him. He was lying in the bed, the quilt pulled up but one pale shoulder still uncovered, a light dusting of freckles on the skin. He was curled up, but his shoulders were shaking, and though she heard the occasional cough, she heard his quiet sobbing breaths between, and the memory kept her awake long into the night. Notes: Hiccup may seem OOC, but bear in mind he's been rejected by everyone and is utterly dependent on the kindness of Astrid's parents. And he's feeling very vulnerable and ill. Don't worry, he's not about to turn into a goody-goody anytime soon. Chapter 37, He's Just Trouble. Chapter text. When Ingrid went in to wake Hiccup in the morning, he was coughing hard and his eyes were feverish. His pale cheeks were bruised and flushed with fever. She gently walked in and pulled the curtains open, flooding the room with sunlight. Hiccup gave a whine that deteriorated into a bout of coughing, curling up and shaking. His bony shoulders heaved and he coughed again, lifting his aching head. "Hiccup, are you all right?" she asked gently, seeing his emerald eyes glassy with fever. He nodded dumbly, grimacing as he tried to get up. "I'm fine," he rasped, his voice almost gone. He looked exhausted. She calmly walked forward, leaning forward and resting a hand against his forehead. His skin was scorching and he recoiled from her touch, his eyes widening in shock. "No, you've got a high fever," she said and stared at him. "Stay there." He shook his head, grimacing. I can't." He mumbled, coughing. "I can't because I don't belong." She pulled the drapes back, half covering the windows once more. "I'll get some aspirin," she told him, peering at the boy. Skinny, bruised and sick, he looked unloved and in need of someone to care for him, someone who clearly wasn't among his parents. He coughed again, his whole body shaking. "Have you got any clothes, Hiccup?" He shook his head dumbly. No," he rasped painfully, tugging the quilt up to his chin. "I left them all to be washed, just in my shorts here." He flushed with embarrassment. "Give me your address," Ingrid said firmly. "I'll collect some clothes." She paused. "Surely your mother must be concerned about you." "Not sure she is," he sighed. "Just don't go when my stepdad is there. Please." She nodded. "I'll bring you something to eat and then you're resting here today," she decided. "I'll fetch you some clothes once Astrid has gone to school. And don't worry, I am sure she can collect your lessons for you to catch up." He coughed again, grimacing against the pain in his chest. "Thanks," he murmured, his eyes fluttering closed. Ingrid's eyes were very thoughtful as she walked into the kitchen, looking up to see Astrid's bright blue eyes. "How's Hiccup, Mom?" she asked. Ingrid shook her head. "He's got a high fever and a horrible cough," she reported. "He needs to stay in bed today and you need to stay away from him, Astrid. You don't want to get what he's got." "I won't. I haven't been sleeping rough in the freezing cold on no food," Astrid thought silently. But she nodded. Her father looked up from his plate. "I don't approve of having that boy here, Ingrid," he commented, his eyes cool. "But he obviously can't go when he's sick." "Where are his parents?" "His father's dead and his mother, well, his stepfather doesn't want him at home," Astrid explained, chewing her muesli. "He's a friend, and I couldn't leave him to freeze." Martin Horferson nodded. "Don't let him distract you," he ordered her, then nodded, grabbing a piece of toast and heading for the door. Astrid got up as well, kissing her parents. "Tell Hiccup I'll see him later," she said urgently. "I don't want him thinking I've forgotten him." "He's sleeping," Ingrid told her, kissing her lightly. "Off you go. I'll watch your friend for you." Astrid smiled and then grabbed her coat and left. Ingrid stared after her and recalled, the boy hadn't even had a coat. What would she find when she went to his home? Oh! What Ingrid Horferson hadn't expected was a neat house on the far side of town, the drive and house immaculate. She pulled up onto the drive, past the mailbox reading Treasure and stopped by the front door. Calmly, she rang the bell and after a few moments, the door opened to reveal a slim woman with graying auburn hair in long braids, her emerald green eyes the mirror of her son's. Ingrid could see the same face shape and echoes of Hiccup in her anxious features. "Mrs. Haddock?" she asked. The woman shook her head. "Treasure," she corrected Ingrid, and Ingrid smiled, her blue eyes inspecting the other woman thoughtfully. They had been on smiling terms in elementary school, though Ingrid hadn't spoken to her or seen her for years. To her eye, Valka Treasure looked really defensive and hunched-shouldered. "I'm sorry," she apologized softly. "I'm here on behalf of Hiccup." There was pause and the emerald eyes flicked up. "Is he all right?" Valka asked softly. "He's got a nasty cough and a fever," she said calmly. "He's staying with my daughter, but he needs some things." The woman stopped aside. "Come in," she invited Ingrid, and the blonde woman walked in easily, seeing a spotless house with nothing out of place. Valka was nervous, looking more at the floor than at anything else. "Do you want to know anything about Hiccup?" Ingrid asked. His mother looked at her as if she had asked an indecent question. "How he is. Why he's staying with a total stranger. He ran away again last night," she said quietly. "He didn't come home on Monday and last night he was brought back by the police after being caught breaking into a garage. He's been fighting and as soon as he got home, he got into a fight with my husband and ran away again." Ingrid stared at her and tried not to look shocked. "He ran away?" Mrs. Treasure gave a grim laugh. "Has he told you something different?" she scoffed. "He has been sullen and troublesome since his father died. He won't get on with my husband. His grades are appalling and he's always in trouble at school. He has detention every single day. I don't even know who he is anymore." "And you say he's friends with your daughter?" Ingrid nodded carefully. "So she says." "Where is his room?" she asked, determined to ask some more questions when she got home. "Top of the stairs, last room on the left," she explained and turned back to the kitchen, leaving Ingrid perplexed. What mother wouldn't worry if her son was sick? What mother wouldn't worry that her son had run away? It was clear that he was unloved and she began to wonder what exactly she had got involved in. But she walked up the stairs and went to the room, pushing the door open and noting the bolts in the outside. Inside, a single bed and chest of drawers was the sum total of furniture. Swiftly, she found a bag and located a grand total of 2 scruffy pairs of jeans, 4 t-shirts, 2 shirts, a patched sweater, 1 hoodie, a single thin jacket, 1 pair of sneakers, a handful of boxers and socks and 1 pair of training bottoms. She stared. This was absolutely everything, every single item of clothing in the entire room. She found a wash bag on the chest and a photograph of Hiccup, his mother and a huge man with flaming red hair and a huge beard, presumably Hiccup's dead father. She slid the photo into the bag as well. Then she turned back to the room. It looked as if no one lived there at all now. With a sigh, she walked down the stairs and met Hiccup's mother again. "Don't you want to know where he is?" Ingrid asked quietly. The woman shook her head. "Until he promises to get on with his new father, no," she said quietly. "But he's your son." Ingrid protested and the woman gave her a strange look. "Don't judge me," she snapped. "You don't have to live with him. He's just trouble." "Please, it's me, Valka Ingrid Horferson. If there's something wrong, I can help." For a moment, it almost looked as if Valka was going to say something, but then she stared at the plain gold band on her finger. When she looked up, her expression was flat and expressionless. "I think you had better leave. My husband wouldn't like you being here." Ingrid was shocked to find herself seen rapidly out the door and had it slammed almost as soon as she had stepped through, hearing bolts slam into place. She looked at the paltry bag of clothes that seemed to be all Hiccup owned in the world, and then she walked back to her car. She thought she saw the curtains twitch, but when she looked up, there was no one there. Oh. Hiccup woke up in the afternoon, his head still aching and chest hurting from coughing. There was a glass of juice by his bed and he slowly lifted his painful head. He blinked and looked around, trying to remember where he was, and then he saw his bag resting against the bed. Grimacing, he scrambled up and swayed, then walked over to find basically all his possessions, including the precious picture of him with his mom and dad. For a moment, he stared at the image, then stroked his thumb over the huge shape of his father, before reverently putting the image by the bed. He swiftly pulled on the training pants and a t-shirt, then drank the juice and slowly walked down the stairs, coughing intermittently. He wondered if he could find some aspirin or some food, and another drink because his throat felt really sore. Astrid's mom was sitting at the kitchen table, searching through a recipe book, but she looked up as he walked hesitantly in, his bare feet almost silent on the wooden floor. She looked like an older version of Astrid, her blonde hair swept up in a fashionable style and her blue eyes calm and thoughtful, but they hardened slightly as he entered the room. "Ah, I see you're up," she commented, and he nodded, covering his mouth as he coughed again. Yeah," he rasped. She pointed to a chair. "Sit down, Hiccup," she said sternly. "We need to talk." His heart dropped to his boots, hearing the tone that usually meant someone was judging him once more. He sat down and folded his arms across his chest, willing himself not to cough. At least he had his things for when she threw him out, though he doubted that would help much in a Subsroberkian night. If he was going to be thrown out to freeze, he might as well go with his head held high. "What do you want to ask?" he asked snarkily, eyeing her warily. She stared at him coldly. "Why did you lie?" she asked him coldly. "You aren't Astrid's friend, are you?" Chapter 38, A Chance. Chapter text. Hiccup swallowed and shook his head. "No, we're not really," he admitted awkwardly. She offered me her help if I was really in trouble." "Why?" Ingrid's eyes were boring into him now. "Are you blackmailing her?" He swallowed and coughed, doubling up and hacking until he almost had no breath. Breathing hard, he paused, then lifted his chin again. "Of course not," he said in disgust. "I can tell you think I'm trash. But what you and everyone else thinks doesn't make me capable of that." His eyes sparkled with anger at the accusation. "I have spoken to your mother," Ingrid told him, and his eyes looked hopeful for all of a second before reality bit him hard. "I can see how that went," he said bitterly. "I'm a bad son, right? Always causing trouble. Won't get on with my stepdad." "She says you ran away," Ingrid said flatly, and his eyes widened in hurt. "No," he murmured. "I know Elle told her that, but she saw, He blinked and shook his head. "Well, that answers that," he added roughly and chewed his lip, his eyes shone and he took a shuddering breath. "Answers what?" Ingrid asked. The bruised face tightened. "She's chosen him," he said thickly. "Look, when she married him, I knew she loved him, but he made it really clear he didn't even like me. But I took it because she needed the home, she needed security. My stepdad isn't a good man. And if he wanted to hit someone, I would rather he hit me than her. But I can't stay, when she only sides with him. When all she says is for me to get on with your father." And he lurched to his feet. "Hiccup," Ingrid began, seeing his eyes flash with anger. "But he's not my father," he shouted, suddenly furious. "He's the man who married my mom after my dad died. The man who watches me wherever I do. The man who tells me no matter what I do, I will fail. The man who threw me out on Monday and forbade me come back until Friday, and only then if I didn't annoy him anymore. The man who threw me out a few minutes after the cops brought me home." "You didn't say anything about being in trouble with the police," Ingrid said sharply. "Does Astrid know?" He stared at her and suddenly all the fight leached out of him. He shook his head. "I didn't tell her," he murmured, turning away and palming his face. There was moisture there. "She asked me to call her if I needed help, and she kept her word. I'm sorry she didn't tell you everything, but I guess she just wanted to give me a chance." He turned away, coughing again and reaching for the doorframe. "Look, I'll go. he said thickly. I don't want to cause her trouble. He shook his head. Just tell her thanks. He stumbled away, up the stairs as fast as he could, head down and breathing ragged. Ingrid paused, then followed him. He was in the room, pulling clothes from his bag and coughing. His breathing was harsh and very ragged, and he spun round as she entered the room, his green eyes wild with misery. I'm going as fast as I can, he said bitterly. At least let me get dressed before I go. Hiccup, we haven't finished, Ingrid said sternly. He shook his head. I think we have, he said softly. I. And he froze as she walked forward and pulled him into an embrace, not even struggling, and she hugged him tightly. He buried his face in her shoulder and she felt wetness there as he sobbed quietly, his skinny arms wrapping around her. It's okay, she said softly. You don't have to go, but you do need to tell me the truth. Beyond words for a long moment, he slowly lifted his head and nodded. Okay, he muttered, palming his cheeks. She held him at arm's length and stared, inspecting him. He was tall and skinny, bruises on his face, and she thought back to the livid slap visible on his face when he had arrived. He sat on the bed and stared at the floor. She dragged up the chair from the desk and paused. Then he shrugged and gave a huge sigh. I guess the first thing you need to know is who my stepdad is. Mr. Treacher, Ingrid said automatically, then blinked. You mean? Hiccup nodded. Yeah, that one, he said sarcastically. I mean, why couldn't my mom marry his good twin? But no, I get the evil bastard who also happens to be the high school principal, so I can never escape him. He paused. And no, Astrid doesn't know. No one does. If they did, I would probably have to leave town. My friends would kill me, for a start. They don't sound like particularly good friends, Ingrid commented. Hiccup shrugged. Got a rep to maintain, he said aimlessly. None of the popular kids would speak to me anyway. You're not my daughter's friend. Ingrid's words weren't a question. He shrugged. I'm her art tutor, that was the truth, he admitted. And she did help me out when my friends decided I needed a lesson in where my loyalties lie. He bit his lip and Ingrid stared at him. The truth, she insisted. He shook his head and he looked stubborn. Look, I can't tell you everything because it would land someone else in trouble, he said, picking his words carefully. But I stopped one of my friends from hurting someone, and they decided that I deserved a beating for that. Ingrid's eyes widened and she stared at him. He gave a shrug. Great, he shrugged. And the police? He shook his head. After I was thrown out by Al, I stayed in the garage where I used to work, he admitted in a shamed voice. But some guys tried to break in and Toothless and I fought them off. Gobber the owner was pretty pissed at the mess I'd made and I kind of lost my temper and told him to stick it. And at school, the crew wanted me to help them break into the garage, and kill the dog. My dog. But I really couldn't say no because the guys who broke in, were the crew's leader's brother and his gang, and one of them had a knife, so I warned Gobber, and though they made me break in, the cops were waiting and, yeah. Ingrid stared at him and saw him fold his arms as he blushed in embarrassment. It clearly wasn't something he was proud of. He coughed hard and grimaced. I won't tell my husband, or Astrid, if you make me a promise, Ingrid said quietly, watching him lift his shocked eyes. He gave a little nod, breathing hard. You can stay as long as you can, as long as you don't get my daughter into trouble. He paused and stared at her in shock. That's it, he asked incredulously. That's all you want? You don't want good grades or me to join the track team or something like that? Ingrid smiled at the sarcasm. I guess you are smarter than you let on, hiccup, she said. You know if you care about grades. You are the only one who can make that choice. I don't think you are a bad person. I think you feel you aren't being given a chance. I know your home life has been pretty hard. And your parents don't support you. Your friends don't seem to be good for you either. So I'll give you that chance, if you keep an eye out for my daughter. He doubled up with another fit of coughing and then looked into the blue eyes. The whole talk was pretty surreal, and he wondered if he was dreaming, but a part of him wondered what it would be like if he was in a home where he wasn't treated like trash. It might be worth trying, at least until he was feeling better. He nodded silently. Can't promise to be a good boy, he admitted. And I know Elle won't be happy, but okay. I'll do my best. Ingrid smiled. I'll get you some soup, she suggested. Maybe you may feel like a shower. He stared at her, then realized how long it had been since he had the chance. He nodded. That would be nice, he said with a shrug. I'm sorry. She rose and smiled. Bathroom's that way, she said. I'll put you out a towel. He managed a grin. Mrs. H. Thanks, he said. I won't let you down. She smiled. Somehow, I know you won't, she said. Chapter 39, Outcast. Chapter text. The next morning, his fever was down, and though he still had a horrible cough, Hiccup forced himself up and dressed in time for school. And then he realized his first problem: he couldn't be seen getting on the bus with Astrid. He was thinking hard as he wandered downstairs, coughing slightly, and then he paused, hovering at the door of the kitchen, seeing the Horfusons all sitting at the table. He stared for a long minute, not feeling as if he had the right to disturb the family, and then he walked in, forcing himself to smile. Morning, he greeted them cheerfully. Astrid looked up from her muesli and smiled, but Mr. Horfuson gave a stony look. With a sigh, Hiccup sat down as Ingrid placed some toast and a coffee in front of him. The boy looked up gratefully and tucked in, eating rapidly. Wow, slow down. Astrid murmured, but he cast her a sharp look. Gotta see Toothless and start walking to school, he told her directly. But the bus. She began, and he sighed. Do you want to be seen getting on the bus with me? He asked her pointedly. She paused and her eyes widened. Just as I suspected, he said with a vague hint of triumph. Astrid. I thought you said you were friends with this boy. Martin Horfuson asked her shortly, peering over his paper. Yeah, she said hastily and cast a look at Hiccup. He shrugged and took another mouthful of toast. But doesn't mean I want to be seen with. Martin frowned. Mr. Horfuson, your daughter is, well, popular and cool, Hiccup explained after an awkward moment. I'm, well, not. So we can be friends, just not, obviously. Astrid nodded urgently. Martin looked from the boy to his daughter and sighed. Kids, he muttered, and turned his attention back to his paper as Astrid almost breathed a sigh of relief. Hiccup gave a small shrug and rose, grabbing his bag and coat. I'll, just see Toothless, he mumbled, and headed out into the yard. Once the door was closed behind him, he took a deep breath of the cold air and coughed, and then heard an excited bark. His face lit as the black shape galloped across the yard and leapt at the boy. Toothless. Bud. I'm so glad to see you. The dog bounced up and the boy crouched down, wrapping his arms round the excited dog and hugged him. At least you don't mind being seen with me, he sighed. Toothless barked and raced away to go and bound around Stormfly. Yeah, thanks Bud, he muttered. At least you've got a friend. He stiffened as the door opened behind him and he heard quick steps approach. Stormfly barked and Astrid said, Hey, girl. The golden dog bounced over to her as he clambered to his feet, to find Astrid offering him a green knitted scarf. She smiled. My mom was worried you'd get cold, with your cough and everything, she said, looking self-conscious. He stared at her, so she walked forward and wrapped the scarf firmly around his neck, tucking it in briskly. Hey, he protested, but she scowled at him, then punched him on the arm. He yelped, clutching at his arm. Ow. Why? That's for being an idiot, she scolded him. You should have called me sooner. You could have frozen to death. Well, couldn't really just turn up, he protested. It's not like we're actually friends or anything. And then she lunged forward and pecked a very light, very quick kiss on his cheek. And that's for, well, you know, everything else, she said, consciously flicking her bangs off her face and running back into the house to pick up her bags for school. He stared after her, his mind blank. What was that all about? And then he became aware of the two dogs sitting side by side, watching him with tongues hanging out, almost looking like they were grinning at him. What are you looking at? Oh. He'd caught the school bus a stop up from Astrid's home and slank to the back, not meeting anyone's eye. Heather and Astrid had been deep in conversation as he walked past, so he had stared out the window all the way to Burke High. He'd arrived early and headed straight for his first lesson. Astrid had briskly presented him with his homework, and though his head was aching, he had struggled through the equations, which turned out useful since Mr. Mildew had singled him out for his absence. The fact he had scored 96% on his work only seemed to anger the teacher. It continued to lunch, with every teacher singling him out to be quizzed. He'd been sarcastic after the first class, and Mr. Grimborn had loaded him with extra work for his insubordination in history despite knowing the incantation for the funeral of a Viking chief word perfect, and he had gratefully headed for lunch. Hiccup. He flinched at Dager's words and turned to glare at the bigger boy as he was stopped in the hall, still outside the canteen. "What do you want?" Hiccup snapped. Dager pulled a mock-hurt face and dragged the skinny teen round the corner behind the lockers. "I'm disappointed. Can't I be worried about my buddy?" Dager asked him. "Yeah, you were real worried when you ran off and left me." Hiccup snarled. He turned to face him. "You let your brother threaten me with a knife and you left me for the goddamned police. You didn't roll on us again?" Dager asked him dangerously, and he rolled his eyes. "Look, I didn't say anything the first time," he snapped. "Dag, you gotta trust me." "Why?" The question was immediate and sharp, sending a shiver down Hiccup's spine. "How long have we been friends, Dag?" Hiccup asked quietly. "Since freshman year." "And literally how many times have I taken the rap for you?" "Well, probably about 100. So let me think. Why change now? You tell me. You're the one who hit Dog's breath." And Hiccup sighed. "For the last time, I'm not watching that idiot rape some girl." "That wasn't some girl, that was Astrid Horferson." Dager protested. "So? She was still a girl last time I looked." "Then prove you've not gone soft on us." "Will never happen, Dag." "What do ya want?" There was a sense of anxiety because he usually got into trouble when Dager wanted him to do anything, but he desperately wanted to get his friends back. Then Dager's next words stopped him in his tracks. "If Dog's breath couldn't fix her, I want you to do it." Dager told him coldly. Hiccup backed away and stared at him, jaw slack. This was psychopathic Dager at his very worst. "Are you crazy?" he shouted. "We're talking major felony. This isn't some prank, this is a crime that people go to prison for years. For Odin's sake, Dag." "No." There was a long pause as the bigger boy stared at him, and finally he snorted. "So that's how it is, huh? Some girl who thinks you're worthless over your friends." His face grew hard and he glared at Hiccup. "Keep out of our way, Fishbone, or you'll find out what we do to people who cross us." Staring after him, the auburn-haired boy sighed. Even if she hadn't given him shelter, even if he hadn't promised her mom he would look out for her, there was only one answer he could ever give. "Thanks, Dager," he breathed. "Now I am officially an outcast." Chapter 40, Double Life. Chapter text. The end of the day was no better than the beginning, as Snotlout and the jocks cornered him and threatened to pound him into the ground. Only the arrival of Alvin had saved him, though the prospect of detention didn't cheer him up at all. "Where are you staying?" Alvin snapped, and Hiccup shrugged. "Indoors, mostly. I mean Burke in winter, temperature's just a little fresh." Alvin's hand grabbed his shoulder and his fingers dug in hard. "Who are you staying with, boy?" he growled. Hiccup gulped and winced at the painful grip. "A friend," he suggested. "Popular guy." "Which one?" Alvin growled. Hiccup stared into his scowling face. "You wanna know? Try following me home," he invited the man. "And then you can persuade them that they really don't want me in their home and will throw me out. Guess what? My stepdad already figured that, so not news. You really want me to freeze, don't you?" "I told you I would make you sorry," Alvin growled, the pressure increasing. Hiccup grimaced. "You want someone to see you doing this?" he asked, looking Alvin straight in the eye. The man lifted his hand, and then heard the approaching steps. He just had time to lower his hand as Astrid, Cammy, Ruff and Heather swung round the corner on their way to cheerleading practice. They quietened down as they saw the principal and murmured greetings, but Alvin just nodded and shoved Hiccup roughly forward. "Get a move on, boy," he growled. "You're late for detention, again." Cammy glanced at him. Gods, does he ever not get detention, she scoffed. Must not want to go home. Ruff sneered. Astrid started and couldn't look at Hiccup, but Heather glared at the boy. Do us all a favor and quit, she sneered. Right, Ast. Hiccup had turned away before he heard the quiet murmur of whatever. Oh. It really shouldn't have bothered him, but somehow it did. He had known that she couldn't acknowledge his existence any differently, but she had actually been, well, nice to him this morning, and it was really hard to recall that at school, he was an outcast, with even his so-called friends now on his tail. Detention had been as fun as usual, but he had put his head down and worked at his homework, finishing off the load of work Mildew had dumped on him before Alvin had called him to the front at the end of the detention. Reluctantly and very sulkily, he had stood before the man. Gods, you looks like some sulky brat. Alvin growled. Hiccup cocked an eyebrow. And, he asked insolently. No rule saying I gotta look like some perfect little boy for you, Al. Where are you staying, boy? Alvin growled. Emerald green eyes flicked up and narrowed. Why? I mean, what's it to you? The tone was sarcastic. I got a duty of care to all me students, Alvin growled, and Hiccup gave a bitter laugh. So maybe I should tell my principal that my stepfather is an abusive bastard, who beats me, starves me and threw me out onto the streets, he asked, watching Alvin grow puce with anger. How you gonna deal with that, Mr. Duty of Care? The man's huge hand lashed out like a shot, impacting Hiccup's cheek. The boy staggered back, clutching the point of impact. I don't believe you, Alvin growled. And no one else will. You're a screw-up. I'm respected in the community. Everyone will think you're lying. Even those cops thought you needed a good hide-in. All I'm doing is what they recommended to sort you out. I'll pass, Hiccup told him shortly, breathing hard as Alvin grabbed his hoodie. Where are you staying? Alvin snapped. Hiccup struggled. Get off me. Tell me, you little bastard, he snarled, grabbing Hiccup's hair and wrenching his head back. I can snap you in two. Gotta be desperate if you do this at the school, Hiccup said quickly. Mom not happy. Missing her son. Alvin threw him back so he staggered and almost fell. You know, she don't want to see you, he said crushingly. And you ain't welcome back. Since you're so happy where you are, you can stay there. Hiccup looked up, eyes wide and dark with hurt. He still wouldn't believe it until he heard it from his mother, though Ingrid's and Alvin's words had his heart sinking. Now get out. He left without another word, hands shoved in his pockets and chin buried in the green scarf. He wondered how it was that no one ever questioned how Alvin treated him, until he realized that Alvin must have chosen his team and they all shared his philosophy. No one cared. He heard voices as he reached the main door. The cheerleaders were leaving after practice, the girls laughing and giggling. Astrid was among them, leading the discussion, and it was obvious that all of them, especially the younger girls, were in awe of her. Admittedly, Astrid was smart, athletic, beautiful and incredibly good at everything she attempted, except art, of course, and then he realized he heard his name. The girls were pointing and he shook his head as he heard shouts. The team were joining the girls from training, and there was a mixture of bravado, flirting and snooky comments suddenly floating around. And then he heard Dager. Fishbone. He flinched but looked up, stopping walking a few yards away. Yeah, Dag, he asked. What you doing hanging around here? You're not practicing anything. Au contraire, Hiccup smirked. I'm practicing detention. Apparently Al thinks I'm not good enough yet, so I practice every damned day. Dager loomed forward. Spending more time with your bestie Al, he sneered. For the last time, Dager, I didn't tell Al that you and that mutton-head Snotlout. Hey. Whatever. That you two idiots decided to start that stupid brawl. I have no idea who did, but I never did. I said it was my idea and he suspended me, but the next morning, I was ordered to go back to school because my suspension had been cancelled. And guess what, when I arrived, not only did I have to go to school, but I ended up blamed for your two being suspended for longer. So go and look for someone else to blame. You know no one cares or believes you, right? Snotlout growled. Whatever. It's the truth, so it ain't gonna change. And I don't care what you think, Snotfis. Hiccup shot back. Astrid shuffled her feet at the back and paled. The atmosphere had noticeably turned menacing as soon as Dager hailed Hiccup. It was clear that the question of who had betrayed the two boys to Mr. Treacher was still a very sore point. She was in the verge of speaking up when Dager's next words stopped her dead. "If it isn't you, then whoever will get the same beating I gave you," he menaced. The girl flinched and stared at the red-haired boy, hearing the emotionless threat. "Can't take it back," Hiccup snapped. "Or, I'd make it up to you, but don't see anyone standing forward to fess up, Fishbone. And as everyone here was there, don't think anyone will." Dager's eyes were icy. Hiccup abruptly turned away, muttering the word cowards just loud enough to be heard. Astrid grimaced. It was a valid accusation. Horfusons were supposed to be fearless, but she was scared to own up because she feared that Dager would do as he threatened, and she had seen how badly Hiccup had been hurt by his own supposed friends. What would they do to her? Especially after what Dog's Breath had tried, and what Hiccup had implied as he got her out of the party. She glanced at her friends. Would they think any worse of her if she never owned up? Hiccup had already taken the punishment for that action, and what was to be gained by getting herself hurt as well? His friends hated him anyway and no one had to know. It wasn't as if he was popular anyway. And as she thought it, she felt ashamed. He was someone who had feelings, who had problems of his own, and her actions, inadvertent though they were, had added to them. Homeless, rejected by his family, freezing, he had come to her as absolutely the last resort, and she had helped him. She heard a muffled cough and recalled he had been sick as well. She really should stand forward, but she was afraid. And not just of what Dager would think, what would her friends think as well? And her parents? No. It was unthinkable to own up. But she owed Hiccup better. Her eyes lingered on the retreating figure, feeling guilt and shame. It was easy to treat him as worthless, but he was brave, kinder than she deserved, and thoughtful. He could have embarrassed her any time, but he understood how things went, even though she owed him far more than she could ever own up. She touched Ruff's arm gently. "Gotta go," she murmured. "I've got to help Mom this evening." The girl nodded absently, her eyes trailing over Iret's buff shape as he was discussing a new play they were practicing with Savage, Tough and Fish Legs. "Oh yeah, Ast, do you think if I asked Iret out, he'd come?" she murmured. Astrid stared at her and at the tall, black-haired figure. "If you don't, you'll never know," she murmured, even though she guessed Iret would run away at top speed. Ruff grinned and waved as Astrid trotted off down the road, heading in the direction of the vanished boy. She glanced back at the group, still bantering spiritedly as she rounded the corner and saw him in the distance. She put her head down and ran after him, panting hard. "Hey! Wait up," she called, but he didn't slow down at all. She huffed and sped up until she pulled alongside. "You could have slowed down," she panted. "Why?" he asked her dully. "So you could start on me quicker." "I wouldn't," she protested, then glanced over her shoulder to make sure no one was watching. He caught the motion and lengthened his stride, pulling away. She had to trot to catch up. "Why are you walking with me?" he asked her pointedly. "You can't be seen with me. You blanked me in school. Aren't you worried someone will see you?" "They're all drooling over the football players," she said, breathing heavily. He coughed. "And you aren't?" "Yuck." "No," she admitted. His green gaze flicked to her and he shrugged. "Not even Snotikins?" he probed. She pulled a face. "As if. Snot loves Snot, Snotty and Snotlout. He doesn't love anyone else," she condemned the boy. "Harsh. What do you say about me, Astrid?" Sarcastic troublemaker, always in the center of any mess and pretty disruptive, she trotted out. "Well. That hurts," he muttered. She sighed. "Can't exactly say okay, he's sarcastic, but he did save my ass a couple of times, loves his dog and is cleverer than he lets on." "Why not?" The tone was sharp. She blushed. "Because they'd ask how I knew," she admitted. "And you aren't exactly Mr. Popular." He managed a grim smile, coughing into his hand. "Actually, the term is social suicide," he rasped, coughing again. She caught the livid welt on his cheek and frowned. She grabbed his arm and swung him round to face her. What's that? She demanded. He pulled away, a hand ghosting the scarlet mark and shaking his head. Nothing you or anyone can do anything about, he said. Look. Hiccup, she said gently. I get you have a tough home life and school isn't fun either. Understatement. Whatever. But back home, with mom and dad, you don't have to pretend. You can be you, and we will accept you. He shook his head. I don't actually know who I am anymore, he sighed. Everything I care for really is gone. Dad's dead, mom seems to have given up on me. My godfather has washed his hands of me. I have no home, and Alvin will never let me graduate. She paused, then gently grasped his hand. He flinched and stared at her with wide emerald eyes. Hiccup, you've got me, she offered. I'll be your friend. Just not at school, he said dryly. She gave a slight shrug. Not yet, she murmured, and he gave a small smile. So you're gradually falling for all this, bad boy, he asked, gesturing to his scrawny shape. Hell, no, she said too quickly, blushing vaguely. There was definitely something about his lopsided smile and the twinkle in his emerald eyes that made something tighten a little in her chest. Yeah, right, he teased her softly. So it's not loud after all. You swine, she shot back. Swine. Is that all you got? Swine. Odin, that's the lamest I've ever heard. Yeah, well, parents not big on cursing, she admitted. Not big on much, he admitted. Cursing, parties, friends, fun. They took you in. She shot back and he stiffened. There was a long sigh. Your mom is the reason why I'm here, he admitted as they rounded the corner and crossed another road. Your dad doesn't like me. He'll warm up to you, in a decade or so. Promises, promises, he teased her. Hiccup. Yeah. Are we having a proper conversation? He met her blue eyes and gave a small smile at her surprised and not dismayed expression. I believe we are, milady, he smiled. Her blonde brows dipped momentarily. What did you call me? Milady. Yeah. Okay. She paused and smiled. Fishbone. Hardly the same level cuteness, but, okay, he sighed as the house came into sight. Milady. Chapter 41, Just Go. Chapter text. The week finished with another away match for the team against Lava Louts Lightning. After a rough encounter, Berk Vikings won. Hiccup had remained in Berk, walking toothless and waiting at home with Astrid's parents. He had been ridiculously self-conscious as he had arrived at her home without her, waiting for 5 minutes before even daring to knock on the door, and he had gulped a huge sigh of relief that as Ingrid opened the door with a smile. He was sure if Mr. Horferson had answered the door, he wouldn't have been let in. And there had been an awkward silence as they sat eating dinner, so he had escaped upstairs as soon as he could, doing homework as the only option. He had no excuse to go with the team because, quite frankly, he wasn't welcome. It had been with an enormous sigh of relief as he heard the front door open and admit Astrid. There was a pang of nostalgia as he heard her call out to her parents and heard their cheerful calls back to see how she was and how things had gone. Her excited voice echoed through the hall, detailing the victory and how well her team had performed. He had almost forgotten how it had been, before his dad died and when he was part of a family. He lay back on the bed with a sigh and wondered despondently when they would ask him to leave. He was lying on the bed, his eyes closed and trying not to wonder what would happen to him next when a knock sounded. Hey. It was Astrid. He opened his eyes and looked over at her. Hey. Somehow, the word was lifeless. She walked in, still munching her sandwich and perched on the desk, her feet swinging. You okay? She asked, chewing. He sighed. Just dandy, he muttered. She sighed. Okay, spill, she huffed. Who made you my mother? He asked, sitting tiredly up. That would be weird. No one. But I'm volunteering for the vacant friend berth, she offered, finishing her sandwich. You look like a wet day. So a nice summer's day in Berk, he said with a faint smile. Hiccup, what's wrong? She asked as he folded his legs and sat on his heels. He gave a small cough into his hand and sighed. How long's it gonna be before your parents want me to go? He asked her directly. I mean, your mom has been great and all, but your dad looks at me like he's just trodden in something. I know he doesn't approve of me. I guess he thinks I'll turn you into an outcast and a criminal, like that's gonna happen. She frowned and read the faint anxiety in his sarcastic words. She swung her legs and tried to understand his concerns. She knew her parents would never turn someone out on the streets who had nowhere to go, but Hiccup felt he was in a very precarious place. I don't think Mom would ever throw you out onto the streets, she assured him, but shouldn't you at least try to speak with your mom? I mean. He scowled. I know what you mean, he said sharply. Patch it up like a good boy and go home. Yeah, can really see my stepdad welcoming me home with open arms. Not. I'll be on the streets before you can say evil bastard. No, that's not what I meant, she protested. You must want to see your mom. He sighed. Yeah, but it's pretty hard to see her without him being there, he admitted. Look, I'm sorry. I guess I'm stressed. Hiccup Haddock stressed. That really smacks of effort and caring. Come on, Miss Perfect. I care about literally several things. Name one. Toothless, he managed after an embarrassing pause, and she gaped, then burst into giggles. Oh, you are playing with fire, trying to contain all this bad boy-ness. He replied with a grin. There will be consequences. Oh, I'm shaking in my boots, she scoffed. What boots? He grinned, scrambling up. He grabbed her foot and inspected it. Nope, not a shoe in sight. Get off, she giggled, trying to jerk her foot away. He cocked an eyebrow. You ticklish, he realized, and managed to run his fingers lightly along her sole before she wrenched her foot away and raced from his room. He was in hot pursuit, laughing as he ran after her. Oh, you are so dead, Miss Perfect. Ticklish, he called as she sped into her bedroom and slammed the door before he could catch her. He leaned against it and lightly tapped it with his fists. I won't forget. I'll get you yet. You can't stay in there forever. You'll never catch me, Haddock, she shouted back. Ha! Wanna bet, he called through and half turned, to come face to face with Mr. Horferson. The smile dropped from his face and he immediately backed up a pace. Sorry, sir. I didn't mean any disruption. Mr. Horferson frowned. Keep it down, Hiccup, he said sternly, and the boy face-palmed as the man turned to return down the stairs. Astrid opened the door to see him standing there, his shoulders slumped. It's okay, she said, and he managed a wan smile. I'll go see her in the morning, he sighed. He'd walked all the way across Burke after breakfast, ignoring the cold and concentrating on what he could say to his mother. He knew Alv intended to go out on Saturday, leaving his mom and Hiccup to clean and tidy the place, and that was his chance. But he waited at the end of the empty drive for a long time before he gathered his courage and walked quickly up to the door to ring the bell. There was a long pause, and he heard her steps come closer. She was not sure whether not to open the door, so he called through. Mom. It's me, he called, and there was a pause, and then she slowly opened the door. He was pleased to note she looked well, her emerald eyes bright and wary, her skin clear and glowing, and she had maybe put a couple of pounds on. Hiccup. What are you doing here? She asked warily. His eyes darkened with hurt at the hostility in her tone, and he took a small step closer. I came to see you, he said. How are you? She stared at him. I'm well, thanks, she said coolly. You? She sounded as if she was speaking to a stranger. He gulped. I'm fine too, he said, smothering a cough. The cold air hadn't helped his chest on the way over. I miss you, Mom. She stared at him. You shouldn't have left then, she told him bluntly, and his eyes widened. He shook his head. I didn't exactly ask to leave, he protested. Al threw me out and... Hiccup. Do you expect me to believe that? She protested. You ran off on Monday, and then you are brought back on Tuesday by the police. Alvin tells me you fought with him and ran away again after they left, and... So that's the line he's gone with, is it? He scoffed. I ran away. Don't you think I would actually grab, say, some clothes if I was running away? Instead, I was barred from the house and thrown out when I was brought back. Your father would be so ashamed if he could see you, Hiccup. Valka told him brutally. Since he went, you've become rude and sullen. Your grades have imploded, Your disciplinary record has collapsed and you are a shadow of the boy I used to love. Used to. There may be an explanation or that. Hiccup said, unable to help himself. My dad died and you remarried someone who loathes me. She glared at him. I really don't want to hear your lies, Hiccup, she said in a weary voice. I have felt so much better since you left. I'm not stressed by your constant arguing and sullenness. You are so disobedient and disrespectful. I don't have to sit here worrying that you will fight.